Chapter 763. The centaur was probably the unluckiest one. As a psychic, his perception was finer and more sensitive than the other two. There was some information that he couldn't block even if he wanted to. In a trance, he was guided by the power of Fusang Divine Tree. He penetrated the water body, the rock layer, the mud, and the magma chamber. After repeated interference collisions, he even vaguely encountered some strange structures. The centaur could feel that the true god was gradually paying more attention to these strange structures. He kept scanning and analyzing them, but these structures themselves had been integrated into the material structure of the water body and rock layer. There was even a part that seemed to be closer to the changing spacetime itself. The centaur was far from being able to experience the specific spacetime structure. It was only under the influence of the Fusang Divine Tree system that he came into contact with some content beyond the scope. This was barely a good thing. It broadened his horizons and deepened his level. It was also beneficial for his future training. The premise was that he could struggle to survive today's terrible situation. The centaur's pessimistic expectations came from the true god's poor progress and his increasingly restless emotions. From his point of view, the true god's searching and scanning work seemed a little crude. At least, compared to the delicate structure that was engraved on the mud, rocks, water, and even the changes of time and space, it was too crude. The physical accuracy of these structures was actually very average. Perhaps they were scratches on the rocks or obvious deep trenches in the mud layer. Many of them were visible to the naked eye. But once it involved the whole, the connection between them became unconstrained and unpredictable. The basic strokes of the meaningful structure might have brushed past the rock, and the next stroke might have connected to the bottom of the silt layer, and the next stroke might have even been a strand of rippling water. It might have seemed like a random drawing and was filled with absurd coincidences, but they were meaningful on a deeper and broader level. At least from the results of the current detection, they were meaningful. The problem was that the true god always brushed past these meaningful structures. He could sense it, but it was often only after he destroyed the carrier of the structure and sensed the special resistance that he suddenly realized it. When he wanted to go back to study, it was already a mess and beyond recognition. It was easier said than done to restore it. Over and over again, not to mention the true god himself, even the centaur from the perspective of half a passerby would explode after following a few times. By the time the saltwater lake was destroyed 7 to 8 times by the true god's powerful power, all traces were completely annihilated. Unless a true god had the ability to turn back time, the only way to find the ultimate mystery was in a dream. It was not easy to admit this fact. At the very least, that was the case for a true god. From the vibrations transmitted by the Fusang Divine Tree system, that person's emotions had probably exploded for the second time. It carried an intense unwillingness and wanted to make a final struggle. Therefore, he expanded the range of his senses and the coverage area of the Fusang Divine Tree's power system. With the saltwater lake as the center, his search radius expanded to 10 kilometers, 30 kilometers, 50 kilometers. As the fulcrum of the system, Minotaur and the other two became the relay station for the transmission of spirit waves. A vast power that didn't belong to them rushed through their body and soul structures. The heat was so strong that it could almost melt their cultivation bases. Minotaur was really afraid. Although he was also considered a believer under the Amaterasu Church's wings, his faith was inferior to that of an old fox like Jingshin, much less fat dragon. It was completely a combination of benefits. The Amaterasu Church didn't care about this. It wasn't that they were tolerant and magnanimous, but that once the true god, who was used to raging impulsively, started killing, shallow believers like Minotaur might be eliminated like ants. In the past, Minotaur only treated such rumors as a joke, but now, he felt that this danger was approaching. Minotaur turned his gaze with great difficulty and swept it across Jingshin. That guy didn't care about the mud beneath him at all. He was already lying on the ground and didn't move at all to show his reverence and the fear of facing the terrible unknown. What the F***CK? Who the hell is this? Since they have such divine powers that can turn invisible, they still use such means to tease us? Or could it be some great enemy of the church who had deliberately lured a true god over to make things difficult for him? No matter how he thought about it, there was always a link in the chain of logic that couldn't be connected. It felt terrible, eh? I can actually use my brain to think about something else? Minotaur sensitively sensed that the pressure of power projected by the Fusang divine tree system had decreased. Is it because the true god's impulsive emotions have begun to fade? At this moment, a rumbling sound came from a certain direction. At first, it sounded like thunder, but Minotaur quickly distinguished that it was a low-flying jet. He subconsciously looked up and quickly captured a tiny silhouette passing under the clouds. It's a plane. It should be a medium-sized transport. Why does it look familiar? Why does this look like the one I forcibly hijacked when I flew from Hucheng? After 6 hours, the transport plane swaggered back and began to hover over the saltwater lake. Does the pilot of the transport plane have any unusual expectations for Fiery Bird? When the centaur had similar malicious thoughts in his mind, thanks to the Fusang divine tree system, his sharp senses accurately captured that the cabin door of the cargo plane in the sky opened, and a figure jumped out of it. Just like what Minotaur did 6 hours ago, but this time there was no help from the sharp-beaked pterodactyl. The figure didn't wear an umbrella, personal aircraft, or other auxiliary equipment. He just jumped down with his bare hands and fell like a stone. Is he going to dump the body? Before he finished his thoughts, the falling figure had already fallen more than half of the height. He had already reached the airspace only a few hundred meters from the surface of the saltwater lake. Without any reason, the falling momentum suddenly slowed down. The change was so drastic that the Minotaur on the ground was shocked. The fatal acceleration of gravity was almost completely applied to the person, causing his limbs to be greatly distorted and squirmed. The vision of a B-level ability user could already distinguish the figure and facial contours of a person. In the eyes of Minotaur, the guy was wearing an anti-tank suit, and the face was vaguely familiar. Yes, it was the co-pilot that Minotaur had seen on the transport plane. But this face only stayed in Minotaur's eyes for a second or two. The facial features formed by the high-speed squirming facial muscles and partial bone deformation had turned into a person he was more familiar with, Luo Yuan. Boom! After a miraculous mid-air buffer, the silhouette resumed its free fall. In the blink of an eye, it smashed heavily onto the surface of the lake near the shore. Splashes of water and mud splattered everywhere, comparable to exploding shrapnel. Chapter 764. A True God. Luo Yuan. On the North Mountain Lake in Ban City, Enla finally confirmed the identity of the Amaterasu cult's expert. At the same time, she was shocked by the one who had just landed in the wilderness. For most people in the inner world, Luo Yuan hadn't been in their sights for a long time. What truly left a deep impression was the attempted assassination of Ouyang Chen and Luo Nan in Xia City. That happened exactly half a year ago. Enla turned her head to look at Luo Nan's reaction. Sure enough, Luo Nan frowned. What did he come here for? We need to retract the induction network. The already distorted image of the wasteland in front of Enlu instantly zoomed out and became even more blurry. It felt like he had returned from the panoramic virtual reality to a traditional video. This was undoubtedly Luo Nan's initiative. It showed how much Luo Nan valued and feared this person. Enlu was unable to pick and choose. She could only follow Luo Nan's gaze and size up Luo Yuan from afar. To be honest, one couldn't see much from a distance. One could only see that this person kept smiling. His smile lines formed clear lines of muscles and showed a serious color. Together, they formed a unique emotional tension. However, Luo Nan's gaze quickly shifted away from Luo Yuan. His focus was mostly on Minotaur, Jingxin, and Fat Dragon, greatly deviating from the focus of the matter. It could be said to be a mediocre director's technique, making Enla, a spectator, rather uncomfortable. Well, Luo Nan's train of thought was the most difficult to adapt to. This sort of clairvoyance through a traditional lens was the embodiment of Luo Nan's focus and direction of thought. It was truly different from ordinary people. Luckily, Luo Nan didn't forget his responsibility of broadcasting. He explained a bit to Enlu, I've been monitoring this fellow quite often recently. He's very sensitive, so I need to change my usual methods. Also, I'll do another experiment. By the way. Enlo would rather not hear this explanation. Compared to the little struggle in Enli's heart, the Minotaur who didn't know that he had become someone's focus was really in a dilemma. The one who fell from the sky crashed into the lake and greeted him as if nothing had happened. At the same time, he slowly walked to the shore. As the distance approached, the centaur could clearly hear the sound of bones and muscles twisting and tearing. The damage from falling from a high altitude was real. But amidst this cacophony, there was clearly a rather harmonious sound that represented the traces of controllable power. It was precisely this power that gathered the body of the co-pilot that should have turned into a pile of flesh and blood, temporarily turning him into another person. Fan Lu had mentioned that the two transport pilots were both products of the gene exchange. They were clones created from genes and asexual reproduction. It was also the carrier of Luo Yuan's power. Luo Yuan did not establish a religious system such as the Fusang Divine Tree or the Scales of Truth, but through those products, his power and consciousness could still be projected to every corner of Earth. Seeing this person here and now, Horned Demon felt uneasy. In fact, after Luo Yuan set foot on the shore of the lake, he stared at the centaur for a long time. Not only his sight, but the centaur's super-perception that was enhanced by the Fusang Divine Tree's system could also clearly feel that above the chaotic and turbulent abyss area, in the deep polar region that was even harder to detect, there was a deadly cannon that silently adjusted its direction and pointed straight at them. I won't be treated like Ouyang Chen, right? If Luo Nan can do it, then so can I. Pooh. Horned Demon's mind was a bit chaotic. Exploring the polar region, he directly felt that Luo Yuan was the ultimate weapon that intimidated all powers and won the respect of the masses. This was an achievement worthy of commemoration, but it was also an even crueler test. After all, this was the planar crossbow. This was a nickname that came from Xia City, and it was quite famous. It was also under the intimidation of this ultimate weapon that the restless true god temporarily recovered his calm. Fat Dragon, who had experienced a fierce battle in the lake water, slowly walked ashore. His originally stiff pupils radiated a divine light that was as brilliant as the morning sun. Soul possession. Pass. Luo Nan quickly eliminated a certain possibility from the yacht. Enle felt quite subtle. Whether it was Luo Nan, Luo Yuan, or True God, all three of them used inconceivable methods to project their own power and consciousness thousands of kilometers away. Their methods of projection were different. No matter which one it was enough to make one feel awed. But in the current situation, why did she feel that Luo Nan was the one who held the upper hand? He maintained a hidden and transcendent state. It was something that True God and Luo Yuan could not discover, and it was hard for them to reach. Yes, you can't compare it like this. Enle was a little scared by her own thoughts. She instinctively shook her head. Luo Yuan also found the right target for conversation. He greeted the special existence that was in the form of Fat Dragon, but in reality, he was a true god for the second time. Lord True God, your temper is still so irritable. The laboratory isn't that important. Why do you need to get angry? It wasn't because of the matter with the laboratory. Luo Yuan's words were too matter-of-fact. Horned Demon and Jingxin really wanted to correct him. But the True God, who was the most impulsive, didn't express anything. Moreover, the restlessness that pervaded the Fusang Divine Tree system continued to fall. Perhaps it was because he was afraid of Luo Yuan's planar crossbow, or perhaps he didn't want to let this powerful person of the same level laugh at him. The True God tacitly agreed to this matter. Fat Dragon obeyed his will and spoke in a low voice. What are your plans for coming here? I'm an outsider. I came here because I was entrusted by someone. If I really want to talk about my plans. Some people want to make money without knowing their intentions, but they have shamefully failed. I came here to watch a joke. As he spoke, he hooked his finger at Horned Demon, who was still half submerged in the water. His smile remained unchanged, but it made Horned Demon's heart suddenly twitch. Horned Demon subconsciously looked at Fat Dragon, but the latter didn't express anything. An ominous premonition lingered in his heart, but Horned Demon couldn't refuse. He didn't even have the confidence to put on his usual crazy appearance. He could only take a deep breath, slowly climb ashore, and drag his way over. The distance between the two wasn't long, so they quickly approached each other. It's worth the ticket to watch you make a fool of yourself. I shouldn't be fussing with you. However, your employer is very dissatisfied with your stupid appearance, and Toyama Auction House has been pressuring you. Speaking of which, you should know what the stupidest thing is, right? Luo Yuan's tone was relaxed, without any feeling of reprimand. The corners of Horn Demon's eyes twitched slightly, and the bad feeling continued to worsen. According to his temper, he wouldn't answer such a question, but now he unconsciously made a stupid response. It's spreading news about Wu Jun. You actually know. Nonsense, of course Horn Demon knew. Actually, it didn't matter how big of a commotion he caused in the wasteland. The manipulator behind the scenes and the Toyama Auction House had the ability to limit the negative effects to a certain range. Only spreading the news about Wu Jun and Luo Yuandao's laboratory was tantamount to smashing the auction house's pot. It made the value of a unique auction item instantly drop by half, or maybe even more. More importantly, once the news reached Luo Nan's ears and reached Xia City, it would be hard for them to pinch Luo Nan if they were to find him first. The treat plan would be in danger of being stillborn. Horn Demon knew this clearly, but he never cared. He had this kind of temperament and character. However, at this moment, he began to feel weak when facing Luo Yuan's smiling face that remained grave and stern. Luo Yuan didn't give him a chance to be at a loss. He reached out and patted Horn Demon's right shoulder. His tone seemed to be sighing. A woman marrying more than one person hurts her character. She might give birth to a son without an asshole. You might not be able to live until then, so it probably doesn't matter. But right now, you need to learn a lesson. At the very least, you need to let the stakeholders vent their anger. Horn Demon's pupils contracted. His body tensed up instinctively, but it was useless. He didn't even have time to react before his right arm was in severe pain. 2 of his fingers had already been torn off. Luo Yuan grabbed his arm and forcefully tore it off from his shoulder. Ah! A blood-curdling scream rang out, but under the control of Horn Demon's instinctive suppression, it turned into a roar that rolled in his throat. Horn Demon's figure fell down. His limb was torn off, and he was bleeding profusely. The corresponding psychological trauma nearly made him kneel on the ground. But in the end, he managed to stand up with difficulty. He just bent his waist, barely maintaining his trembling body. His mouth oozed bloody saliva, and his eyes sprayed poisonous flames. He stared fixedly at the muddy shore of the lake. It was as if his mortal enemy was hidden in the ditch there. At this moment, whether it was on this side of the wasteland or the distant North Mountain Lake of Ban City, the air froze. Only Luo Yuan's hoarse voice echoed, "I hope you can accept and understand this punishment. To tell you the truth, as a former employee of the laboratory, I chose a slightly more severe method. I feel much more comfortable now." Horn Demon's body just trembled. He didn't say a word. In fact, even he was surprised that he was able to keep his mind clear, calm, and restrained. He wasn't the only one who was surprised. Enla heard a low cry beside her, and there were some words. She didn't hear it clearly due to the excessive vagueness. When she looked back, she only saw Luo Nan's lips slightly open and close. She was unable to distinguish it. But at this time, Luo Nan's lens was firmly locked onto Horn Demon's body. Luo Yuan held the severed arm that once belonged to Horn Demon in his hand. This severed limb was still twitching. He raised his eyebrows and placed the torn wound before his eyes. He sized it up seriously. The activity of the nerve cells is much better than I imagined. The repair ability isn't bad either. Look, the bleeding has stopped. Your gene modulation last time wasn't completely useless. You can do a local proliferation repair later. You'll pay the cost yourself. He threw the severed arm into the mud after saying this. Okay, I finished dealing with this matter. Let's hurry up with the laboratory. He turned to Fatty Dragon. His unchanging smile matched with his eyes, indicating for Fatty Dragon to look up. At this time, the medium-sized transport plane that carried Luo Yuan over had already deviated from the sky above Saltwater Lake. It flew northwest. It was unknown when, but it pulled up colorful smoke in the air, afraid that others wouldn't be able to see it. Just when everyone's gazes were focused, something was thrown down from the transport plane. Of course, it wasn't a person this time. It was a beacon that pulled up colorful smoke. Chapter 765. When Luo Yuan's suggestion was implemented, the people who were still alive on the side of the saltwater lake were already in the off-road vehicle on the lakeshore, speeding towards the beacon location of the colorful smoke pillar. The atmosphere in the car was very strange. The off-road vehicle itself was Gardner's legacy. Even if the man, who was suspected to be a military spy, was still breathing when the true god descended, he was already dead after being sifted through 7 or 8 times in the saltwater lake. Without the original owner, the authority of the off-road vehicle almost became a problem. Fortunately, Luo Yuan carried a new generation of dynamo core that was said to be used for internal testing. In addition to being able to be implanted into the human body, this thing seemed to be a natural enemy of intelligent systems. Luo Yuan used it to hack the control system of the off-road vehicle. Although some functions involving the military's remote control authority were restricted, basic driving was not a problem. Luo Yuan also sat in the driver's seat. The front passenger seat was given to the largest, fat dragon, and 3 people were squeezed in the back seat: Jingxin, who pretended to be mute, the centaur with a broken arm, and Hua Dian, who was lucky enough to survive. Jingxin's talkative attribute disappeared the moment the true gods will descended. He was now a good dog, obedient wherever the will of the true god descended. The centaur's state was a bit more complicated. He found the medical box from the off-road vehicle and was bandaging the broken arm. However, he looked at his hand movements. His thoughts drifted to somewhere else, and his eyes were uncertain. As for Hua Dian, as a commercial employee, he didn't have an obvious position. When Fat Dragon and others' internal communication network was hacked and information was leaked, his first reaction was to stay away from the matter. Although he didn't run away in the end, he avoided the direct impact of the true god's wrath and survived. However, he was swept by the power of the Fusang divine tree and was inexplicably stuffed into the car. He was also listless. He wanted to pretend to be a dead dog, but he couldn't hide the nervousness in his heart. At this time, Luo Yuan used his hoarse voice to pacify the whistling dry wind. Everyone, relax. Visiting Luo Yuandao's laboratory, appraising, playing some dirty tricks, and doing some experiments, isn't that your goal? This goal will soon be achieved, so you should be happy. He smiled and turned his head to look at Fat Dragon's stiff face. Don't think that I'm joking. It's just that some people can't stand your torment. As an outsider, the reason why I'm here is because I've been entrusted by someone. Let's not talk about the distant matters, but at the very least, I have to make sure that the Toyama auction house is all right. Speaking of which, you're considered a major shareholder. Fatty Dragon glanced over, his eyes glowing like the sun, and the pressure on the spiritual plane was as strong as a storm. However, Luo Yuan didn't care at all. The centaur can come over, and everyone has already turned a blind eye to it. But with such a big movement, the auction item that was won with great difficulty may not be sold. At that time, Lord True God, I'm afraid that your Pope Father won't look too good either. Before Luo Yuan could finish his sentence, Horn Demon, Jingxin, and Hua Dian, who were at the back, lowered their heads at the same time regardless of their physical or mental state. They really treated them as 3 dead dogs, yearning to spit out their tongues and die to prove their innocence. The relationship between the 2 extraordinaries, the true god of the Amaterasu cult and the Pope, as well as the story of how the Amaterasu cult started, was more or less a taboo in the inner world. The son was a true god, and the father was the Pope. Such a strange configuration of the upper echelons almost confirmed the nature of the Amaterasu cult as a grassroots cult before its rise. Some things could be said in private, but it would blow up if it was said in person. Horn Demon and the others seemed to be able to hear the groan of the off-road vehicle under them on the verge of collapse. But in the end, the off-road vehicle still arrived near the beacon thrown by the transport vehicle in relatively good condition. Just as the vehicle arrived, two figures appeared on the horizon of the wasteland. The distance and direction were different, but their unhurried pace was similar. It felt like they were calmer than the group of people who came by car. Anthony and Vanta. They've been nearby for a long time. The will of the true god in Fatty Dragon's body made a direct judgment. Everyone who comes is a guest. Don't you also wish for more visitors? Luo Yuan waved at the two in a friendly manner, then jumped out of the car. The light in Fatty Dragon's eyes swept over the two people. The aura on Anthony's body flowed sluggishly like liquid mercury. It was obvious that he had endured a power that far exceeded the limits of his body and soul structure. This was what it looked like when a mortal used divine methods. As for Vanta, from the true god's point of view, Vanta's consciousness was completely sealed in the fortress built of a physical body. Apart from some fluctuations that radiated, there were no other traces. Even with the power of the Fusang divine tree system, it was impossible to determine the truth in a short period of time. However, this action, at the level of an ability user, was probably equivalent to an ordinary person blocking their mouth and nose to hold their breath, but he could actually hold it. He was quite a strange fellow. At this moment, Luo Yuan clapped his hands to attract everyone's attention. It was almost exactly the same as what Horned Demon had done a few hours ago. Jingxin subconsciously glanced at Horned Demon, but the latter was in a daze and did not seem to notice. I know that everyone is here for Luo Yuandao's laboratory. Now that everyone has been gathered here, I want to save some time and the negative impact it will bring. To put it simply, if there's anything, go to the laboratory to solve it. Don't mess around outside. The people who came with the off-road vehicle already knew the ins and outs of the matter. Anthony and Vanta could not hide their puzzlement. They did not know why Luo Yuan jumped out. Luo Yuan did not explain further. He quickly cut to the point. Due to the characteristics of the laboratory entrance's irregular movement, almost no one can lock onto the area where the entrance is located over a long period of time. Except for Wu Jun. The few people from the Amaterasu parish added in their hearts. However, Horned Demon had some luck. Of course, there is also the surprising greed of a certain parish. He locked onto this relatively narrow area with relative accuracy. In this way, for a former laboratory employee like me, finding the entrance is more or less up to the task. The smile on Luo Yuan's face seemed to become deeper. When we were maintaining the anchoring device back then, we often used this matter as a bet. Of course, we must first eliminate senior sister Qing Wen, otherwise there is no way to play. Come on, the top auction item worth 100 billion, the future hot research base, and of course, the Holy Land for writing papers, Format 70 Research Institute, welcome everyone. Following his voice, a mechanical squeaking sound came from the ground under everyone's feet. At Luo Yuan's feet, a part of the red soil sank, revealing a rather deep hole. Chapter 766. There were no natural anomalies, nor were there any lighting effects. It was just a bare cave with a series of creaking sounds on the uneven red soil. There was a flight of stairs at the bottom. This setup was barely passable as the entrance to a secret laboratory in the wilderness, but it was far from what everyone had been imagining and trying to figure out for a period of time. There's no need to be suspicious. It's here. Everyone, just come to the front. The 7 people present gathered together. The participants of the transaction in front of this door maintained their original state of mind. Most of them maintained an intense and urgent interest in the laboratory. However, they were more or less stunned when they saw this scene. This is Bo Qingwen's design. It is said that the structure of the door is based on solid rock. There are requirements for the environmental structure, so no matter where it is moved, it must touch the ground. This design is quite basic. It doesn't rely on instruments to complete it. Therefore, the people from the Toyama auction house couldn't do anything about it when they dismantled the anchoring device. Of course, in order to avoid moving it into the water, opening it at the bottom of the lake and causing water to flow in, the anchoring device was designed to avoid danger. Fortunately, the saltwater lake you guys are in doesn't have this thing. Otherwise, you would have to struggle with the water first. Fatty Dragon occupied the largest area in front of the cave. The will of the true god attached to Fatty Dragon scanned the ordinary door on the ground a few dozen times. It muttered to itself for a moment before turning its gaze to the Horn Demon. Among everyone present, only the Horn Demon had truly been to Luo Yuandao's laboratory, aside from Luo Yuan. Of course, he could provide proof. The Horn Demon's consciousness entered a half-dazed state. He didn't even pay much attention to the true god's gaze. Instead, he slowly bent his knees and half-knelt on the ground. He used his only left hand to dig at the red earth at the edge of the cave. Not only did he dig out the red earth granules, but he also dug out the rock fragments below. Then he stuffed it into his mouth, chewed, and tasted it. Only now did he speak vaguely to Fatty Dragon. Every time I see it, I feel that it's inconceivable. This taste. This fellow really is a madman. Yinlu evaluated in a low voice on the yacht on Beishan Lake. She turned her head as she spoke, wanting to find some sense of approval with Luo Nan. But at this moment, she saw the youth beside her squint his eyes. His lips and tongue were slightly licking and biting. There was clearly nothing there, but it seemed like he was tasting some special dish. Yinlu was horrified. That was tasting dirt. Aside from the fact that there was no sand in his mouth, all of Luo Nan's facial expressions and movements were nearly 100% synchronized with the Horn Demon that was over 3,000 kilometers away. Oh, there was also a sparkling luster at the corner of her eyes. Yinlu was at a complete loss for a time when faced with Luo Nan's bizarre state. He wanted to break the ice, but he didn't have the courage to do so. His entire body froze in place. After a few seconds, the young man beside him let out a sigh of relief and removed the strange state on his own. No wonder I couldn't find it. I've overlooked too many structural details. It turns out that it's been reassembled and connected. I've been too naive, first, sir. Oh, it's okay. One of my doubts has been resolved, and I've found some very good teaching materials. Luo Nan turned his face to reveal an extraordinarily brilliant smile. With that said, he erased the useless configuration blueprints and compared them to the current location of Luo Yuan and the others. He reconstructed the terrain and the door that had just opened. Previously, Luo Nan didn't understand why he could use himself as the starting point to set up the large coordinate system. He had a deep perception of the curvature of spacetime and its structure. He was able to capture the intersection point between planes like the cloud world and the deep blue world and the local spacetime. He just couldn't find any traces of his grandfather's laboratory in this wasteland. Now, with his mother's work, he had reconstructed the spacetime interference structure. Everything became a matter of course. Luo Nan liked this answer very much. He liked it very much. Luo Nan's state became even more relaxed under his great mood. Even though he was using his heart to reproduce the relevant configuration blueprints, he still remembered to give Yinlu a reminder. I'm not clear about the specific environment of the laboratory. For the sake of caution, the view will be narrower. I basically don't need to filter anything anymore, huh? Before Yinlu could understand what was going on, the group of people in the wasteland followed Luo Yuan's lead. They followed the stairs down the cave and entered one by one. Yinlu looked from Luo Yuan to Jingxin, who entered last. There was no one left at the cave entrance, but the corresponding lens didn't change from beginning to end. Just as she was puzzled, the lens finally changed. The change was very abrupt. The lights suddenly dimmed and the space felt cramped. When it became clear again, all she saw was a wall of flesh in front of her. It was Fatty Dragon, the carrier of a true god's soul possession. How could it be so close? And this perspective, Yinlu's heart raced. Her mind quickly recalled the sequence of people entering the laboratory one after another. The first was Luo Yuan. The second was Fatty Dragon. The third was the Horn Demon. That's right. According to the sequence, the Horn Demon went down right next to Fatty Dragon. This position and height were very close. Thinking back to the synchronized reactions of Luo Nan and the Horn Demon, Yinlu finally connected the logical chain. This was also a soul possession. How did Luo Nan do it? While she was in a trance, the group of people had already passed through the underground passage and entered a relatively spacious area. According to Luo Yuan, this was the most spacious place in the entire laboratory. People adjusted their positions here and looked around. Luo Yuan continued to introduce, the structure of the laboratory is very simple. Actually, apart from a very small number of people, experiments can't be done here. It's more like an observation point. Right now, all the facilities and equipment here have been moved away. Even the observation itself has become a problem. But I think this shouldn't be a problem for everyone here. The Horn Demon. It was unknown whether or not the Horn Demon was completely under Luo Nan's control, but it turned its head to observe. Yin Luo was able to confirm that they were in a semicircular space. It was completely empty. All that was left were the messy instrument tables and some of the severed wires. The demolition work of the Toyama auction house was done very well. Right now, the only eye-catching thing here was the curved surface in front of them. It was similar to the arrangement of a ship's porthole. The curved surface was a whole piece of transparent interface. At the very least, it should have been transparent at first. It was just that it was gray and dirty, completely obscuring one's vision. Even if it wasn't obscured, one could still see it in this underground space. Oh, was it a misconception? Why did she feel that there really seemed to be a depth behind the gray and dirty mirror surface in front of her? Moreover, it was shaking and swaying violently. It was like a sandstorm between the portholes, covering the entire area of vision. This was because the sandstorm was airtight. It was like a thick rock layer that completely buried the porthole interface. Was this an underground sandstorm? What was this? Chapter 767. The observation point that Luo Yuan mentioned wasn't big. With Fat Dragon's massive physique, it only took 2 steps to arrive behind the circular observation window. Following that, he reached out his hand and touched the inner layer of the window. He was also sensing the details of the collision between the window and the sandstorm outside. A great spectacle. The will of the true God whose soul was attached to Fat Dragon described it this way. He rarely used the word great, but at this moment, it wasn't easy to find a word that was more in line with reality and his state of mind. Lord True God should have seen it before. Horn Demon once visited this place. Back then, it was a better observation opportunity. He's not a good carrier. Under the propping mulberry trees system, the meaning of this sentence was equivalent to, he's not a good believer. On the other side, Jingxin's heart instinctively twitched when he heard this. He subconsciously lowered his head, afraid that the true God would comment on him. However, as the person in question, Horn Demon only stared intently at the observation window. He looked at the thick sandstorm outside with amazement at his level of concentration. The true God's attention was still focused on the sandstorm outside the observation window, so he didn't care about Horn Demon's reaction. He used Fat Dragon's thick fingers to slowly rub against the windshield, feeling the details of the collision between the inside and the outside. At the same time, he said in an especially gentle tone, those sand-like fragments have spatial textures. Those sand-like fragments have the texture of space. We don't necessarily understand what space is, but we give it this definition. At the very least, it's an approximation. It makes people feel that if these fragments are pieced together, they will form an additional dimension that can accommodate us. Luo Yuan clapped, as expected of Lord True God. You sound like you're preaching. I'm just deliberately mystifying things. If I really knew the truth behind it, why would I need to say so much nonsense? The true God's attitude was very frank. In front of the mystery that seemed to be within reach, his reputation wasn't that important. He continued to rub the window. It was shaped like a windshield, and it did block the sandstorm outside. However, behind the seemingly simple phenomenon, there was a deep and complicated mechanism. If it's just an ordinary windshield, including this laboratory, and if it's just an ordinary underground building, then nothing will be left behind under the erosion of the sandstorm outside. Such craftsmanship is rare in the world, right? In fact, it's unique. Luo Yuan also walked to the observation window and stood side by side with Fatty Dragon. Ignoring the difference in size, the two people's auras were equally matched. He calmly explained, Luo Yuandao and his son, along with Bo Qingwen, they slowly constructed this laboratory in the sandstorm that we are currently witnessing. They continuously pushed deeper into the sandstorm. In fact, the main task of constructing and pushing forward was all done by Bo Qingwen. In this field, her talent was displayed without restraint, especially in the middle and late stages. She made progress almost every day, and every 2 or 3 weeks, she would have a new discovery. Luo Yuandao, on the other hand, shifted his research field to the practical application of formatting theory. Luo Zhongheng was the most active experimental subject. He could always digest the new results of Luo Yuandao and Bo Qingwen. At that time, everything seemed to be going well, until one day, an unforeseen event occurred and the process was interrupted. Wait, structure? What are they using? Materials? Technology? The true God grasped a key word. About that. Luo Yuan stomped his feet, letting everyone present feel the physical nature of the laboratory. The place we are in seems to be the product of hollowing out the rock strata. In the first 2 years that I came here, I always thought that it was like this. But in fact, this place is pieced together using building blocks. Oh, the true God also said this word. It's really amazing. As for the raw materials, it is said to be those. Luo Yuan pointed outside the observation window. There was only one thing there, and that was the sandstorm that was so dense that it could no longer be distinguished from the static state. Every fragment is a building block, with a specific shape and nature. Although we don't know why they are broken and how they are restored, with such rich materials, it is still possible to pick apart from them and redesign a small room in your heart. These are Bo Qingwen's original words. Fatty Dragon turned his head and stared blankly at the silent roaring sandstorm outside the window. The others were similar. After knowing the premise, the originally cramped laboratory gave people a completely different feeling. Even if they were here in person, it was hard for them to imagine how Bo Qingwen had pieced together the sand and dust into a building of this scale using the method of building blocks. After so many years, I have returned to the old place. I am also very surprised that it can still maintain its general appearance. Luo Yuan smiled and looked up. No one knew what he was looking at. At the end of his line of sight, there was nothing but the ceiling. Bo Qingwen. Fatty Dragon said this name, which was equivalent to the will of the true God giving extra attention. It sounds like an excellent woman. Why isn't she famous? If even the true God can't really understand her genius and technology, how can you count on those ordinary people? Of course, she is also an excellent architect. Even in the wilderness, her light will shine sooner or later. However, the bad luck of the Luo family infected her, and of course, that bastard. At this moment, no one could see Luo Yuan's expression, but even the true God attached to Fatty Dragon could not continue the conversation for a while. In the end, Luo Yuan turned his face again, still with the same smiling expression. Okay, let's not talk about unpleasant things. Everyone has paid a great price to get the opportunity to visit, study, and inspect the goods. I hope that you won't cause trouble or even lose your life because of some low-level mistakes, at least in the eyes of former employees like me. So, please allow me to talk about some taboos in the laboratory. At this point, Luo Yuan turned his head to look at the centaur and asked, You are also a person who has been tossing around here. Have you told everyone? The centaur glanced at him and ignored him. Luo Yuan was not angry. Then I'll explain it from the beginning. It's not particularly complicated. There are only 3 basic principles. First, I believe that you all know very well that the sandstorm outside the observation window is not a real sandstorm. Any contact with it that you think is infallible will lead to fatal consequences. Second, don't leave the scope of space you can understand. I mean, this laboratory is your shelter. Only here can you observe the sandstorm more leisurely, and at the same time, you don't have to worry about your own survival. Well, we have been bored here for too long. We might as well go to other areas of the laboratory to recognize the way and identify the safe zone. Luo Yuan left the observation point first, leading a group of people through the corridor of the laboratory, introducing the rooms on both sides. The main structure of the laboratory is like a crab, with a wide and hard carapace and 2 pairs of strong chelicerae stretching out. Its upper body is protruding forward, exposed to the sandstorm, and the back is still attached to the space we are familiar with. Basically, the head and chelicerae are very strong. At least when I am here, I can listen to the sandstorm and the special interference sound of the laboratory and have a good dream. You have seen the laboratory. The circular corridor we are walking in is the chelicerae on one side. We call it the left chelicerae corridor, and the symmetrical side is naturally the right chelicerae corridor. Note that they look like a ring, but they are not connected. There is a room at the end, and if you want to die, you can go in. Here we are. In front of the place where Luo Yuan stopped, there was a seemingly very thick metal door, equipped with a turntable lock similar to that of a traditional vault, highlighting the cautious mentality of the designer. Well, this set of safety doors was installed after Bo Qingwen's death. Because without her, the follow-up project was aborted. So you guys made that plan to treat us to a meal to let the only child in the world who has materialized formatting theory and proposed configuration theory help you solve the problem of luck? Luo Yuan was still smiling. Don't blame me for being picky, true God. First of all, formatting theory isn't some lost secret manual. You can give me a few of your church's believers now, and I can let you see the results in a month. Of course, after a period of time, I can't guarantee how many people will survive. Secondly, configuration theory isn't the patent of that child. The Apocalypse Laboratory and the Deep Blue Laboratory have even more mature industrialized technology, but they are biased towards physical products and are not related to the high-end needs of the laboratory that involves the structure of space and time. In fact, there is no evidence that the child has this kind of ability. The theoretical technology he has displayed is still limited to the spiritual side or the soul. It's just that the person who proposed the plan and I, the consultant, are all loyal supporters of the bloodline theory. So many people want to see if the kid who inherited Bo Qingwen's bloodline has talent in this area. At the end of the day, this is more like a prayer ceremony before trying your luck. At least that's what I understand. Driven by the true God's will, Fat Dragon's chest shook and he laughed softly. At this moment, someone in the crowd suddenly raised his hand. The one who did this was the centaur. He raised his only left hand and attracted everyone's attention. Under the gazes of the 2 groups of extraordinaries, he spoke in a hoarse voice. Mr. Luo Yuan, according to my understanding, you should be the luckiest of all the laboratory employees. If, as you said, you don't have the corresponding splicing technology, then you were even luckier to find a fragment with an astonishing volume? How did you move it and use it? Or is it still here, in the depths of this sandstorm? The already narrow left pincer corridor seemed to be about to explode from the centaur's wanton disclosure. Those who knew and those who didn't subconsciously held their breaths as their brains worked quickly. They wanted to see how Luo Yuan would answer and react. The true god who possessed Fat Dragon could have stopped the centaur with a shout, but he didn't. Luo Yuan stared at the centaur, and the smile on his face that revealed the muscles on his cheeks deepened. But in the end, he said in an extremely calm tone, "That's a private deal between me and the goddess of destiny. It's not suitable to say it face to face." A hoarse laugh came from the centaur's throat. He didn't continue to ask and just made an evaluation. Chapter 768. Not good. Enla felt that the situation was far from good when the centaur suddenly opened his mouth in the laboratory. She couldn't tell whether the centaur or Luo Nan was speaking from the centaur's perspective. Enla was almost certain that Luo Nan's emotions had already seeped into the centaur's body 3,000 kilometers away. Fortunately, due to the centaur's usual crazy behavior, and the corresponding underlying mechanism was hard to imagine, neither Luo Yuan nor the true god who possessed the Fat Dragon suspected anything. But they didn't need to suspect anything. Luo Nan was about to explode. His face was a mix of green and red, especially when Luo Yuan recklessly evaluated Luo Yuandao, Luo Nan, and Bo Qingwen. When Luo Yuan spat out the word of vile spawn, the storm above the abyss was wrapped in thunder and lightning. It buzzed in the deep sky. Even the Blood Soul Temple that Enlil relied on seemed to groan and sway in the thunderstorm. What would she do if she made a move? What would she do if she leaked her tracks? Enlil's mind churned with jumbled thoughts, but she couldn't find a way to dissuade him. It was hard to form an effective response. The setting sun above North Mountain Lake shone down. It was warm, but Enlil already felt the chill of the night ahead of time. She didn't care to look at the centaur's reaction in the distance. She just stared at Luo Nan and prayed in her heart at the same time. But her mind was in chaos as to what she should pray to and who she should pray to. That bitch. Luo Nan suddenly repeated the words that had just echoed in the laboratory. This made Enlil even more certain that the centaur's words and actions were influenced by Luo Nan's interference. She actually didn't quite understand who the so-called bitch was, but Luo Nan being able to open up a channel of communication was already a joyous matter. She hurriedly continued, "You're saying, the goddess of fate. That bitch." Luo Nan rarely used vulgarities, but he was speaking more and more naturally now. And he couldn't stop once he opened his mouth. He continued on without end, "She can flirt with countless people at the same time. Then she can randomly choose a lucky person and let that person enjoy everything alone. She can let others bear the rest of the misfortune. Flirt. Huh, flirting with that bitch, I really believed her nonsense." Enlil opened her mouth, but she was actually speechless. It wasn't that Luo Nan's eloquence was overflowing. Rather, she had already been defeated by Luo Nan's chaotic logic and his corresponding intense emotions. Luo Nan's arm swept across the virtual work area, causing the graphics on the surface to fluctuate and tremble. They were practically unrecognizable. This was undoubtedly an emotional action. It was probably because the psychic diagram reminded him of the so-called flirting theory in the past, and he was seriously displeased. Enlil didn't dare to advise him. She was afraid that she would say something that would provoke Luo Nan. Luo Nan would immediately start a war with the two extraordinaries in the laboratory. Right when she was at a complete loss, she saw Luo Nan's movements suddenly come to a halt. He forgot to retract the arm he had waved. He only used his eyes to stare fixedly at the work area. He stared at the turbulent light and shadow that had yet to completely recover. Enlil turned her gaze as well, but there was nothing within the faint glow of the work area. Aside from the psychic diagram and the structural design diagram that had just recovered from the distortions and turbulences, there was nothing else. She was unable to see any special changes. On the contrary, Luo Nan's aura was constantly changing. That fluctuating aura was like the roaring and churning sea on the psychic diagram. There seemed to be some sort of resonance between the two. Ah, there it is. Enlil chased after Luo Nan's line of sight. She stared at a certain area on the psychic diagram. Actually, she still didn't quite understand, but Luo Nan's deep whisper rang out at the same time, giving her a simple explanation. "There's a change." Luo Nan extended his hand. His fingertips touched the scene of the clouds surging above the psychic diagram. He slowly drew his hand over. He only thought of something halfway through and activated the drawing function. He scribbled a few times on this area, and then he drew a few strokes. Then he stopped and sized it up in detail. Actually, the overall structure of the lines and shadows of the psychic diagram hadn't changed too much. But when Luo Nan raised his hand again, Enlil felt that the electric arcs leaping between the clouds and shuttling between the sea tornadoes seemed to be much denser. Correspondingly, the scene of the storm on the psychic diagram gave people an increasingly unbridled and wild feeling. After looking at it for a long time, it was as if the entire scene was cut from the actual scene of the sea and the sky. It pounced directly into the depths of the eyes. This diagram? Enlil didn't know how to describe it for a time. Luo Nan's response was exceptionally fleeting. They can indeed form a connection. The goddess of destiny might be a bitch, but she's always been exceptionally lenient towards the strong. Although this proves that she's a bitch even more. Luo Nan's incoherent words made Enlil even more worried. Luo Nan wasn't angry at this moment. It was as if he had been infected by the deranged horn demon. Luo Nan suddenly turned his head while his thoughts were running wild. He bared his teeth at her and laughed. Oh, I've been infected by that horned demon. Yin Li's hair stood on end. Luo Nan's smile and words were simply a conversation with her soul. Right now, she was in front of Luo Nan's eyes. Her entire body was glowing red. It was hard to conceal anything. And then there was this tone and style. Luo Nan's eyes were a bit absent-minded, but his mouth was extremely polite. Sorry, I didn't want to scare you. If I didn't do this, I wouldn't have been able to utilize that fellow's special sensory ability. He really is a lunatic, and a freak. Yin Li didn't know what was going to happen next. The logic of a lunatic was simply impossible to understand and predict. Even in front of Luo Nan, who seemed to be able to see through her soul, she still had this thought. Otherwise, she would have been driven insane. Right when Yin Li was in a state of fear, the turbulent atmosphere in Luo Yuandao's laboratory over 3,000 kilometers away gradually calmed down. People were already used to Horn's deranged behavior. In addition to the magnanimity of the two extraordinaries, the group of people acted as if nothing had happened. They continued to familiarize themselves with the laboratory's environment under Luo Yuan's guidance. They searched for places of interest and value. They also verified whether or not the auction items and corresponding prices were appropriate. Everyone had a ruler in their hearts. They all had their own standards, so they slowly spread out and acted on their own. Luo Yuan didn't mind. He led the group around the laboratory and considered his mission accomplished. He stayed at the observation point and chatted with the will of the true God, who also stayed there. Jingxin, a subordinate follower of the Amaterasu cult, stayed by his side. He was trembling with fear and filled with jealousy. He was jealous that the other follower in name, the Horned Demon, could leave so boldly. Was this preferential treatment for a lunatic? The Horned Demon didn't care what other people thought. He directly turned to the right claw corridor, where he had spent less time before. He walked all the way to the end of the corridor, and as expected, he saw a metal door that looked like a vault. He was not alone. Detective Hua Jian had the same ambition as him. The latter was only half a minute later than him. When she saw the centaur's back, she hesitated for a moment before leaning over to greet him. She started a conversation as if she was chatting. Brother Horned Demon, are you interested in this place? Sigh. If Mr. Luo Yuan's tree hole project was completed, the value of this laboratory would increase tenfold. What a pity. Yes, it's a pity. The Horned Demon's answer was perfunctory. However, he still paid extraordinary attention to the room behind the metal door that was bound to be destroyed. Even a blind person could see it. Hua Jian followed the Horned Demon's focus and tried to obtain more valuable information from this lunatic who had entered the palace twice. I really want to open this door and take a look. Hey, hey, hey. When she saw the Horned Demon's actions, Hua Jian felt like her hair was about to explode. She instantly retreated 7 to 8 meters, almost to the other end of the circular corridor. The Horned Demon's hand was already turning the wheel, but he didn't open the door. Perhaps he didn't know the password. He finally placed his hand on the wheel and asked a question that seemed rather idiotic. Why is it called the Tree Hole Project? What's the criteria for the name? Hua Jian wanted to say something like, I have nothing to say to a lunatic like you. Please stay away from me. However, the habit of commercial espionage allowed him to continue the conversation as much as possible and deepen the communication. Brother Horned Demon should have also detected the environment behind the door. If the other side hasn't changed beyond recognition, isn't its structure just a long and narrow tree hole? Of course, if it's flat, it's a long shuttle. Then why not just call it a shuttle? Or a rocket? Hua Jian indicated that this conversation with a low IQ and high insanity attribute couldn't be continued. The Horned Demon didn't care if he didn't get an answer from Hua Jian. Or rather, from the beginning, the Horned Demon and the will in the depths of his heart didn't expect to get an answer from anyone. He just took this opportunity to observe, think, and judge. Now that he had a corresponding result, the Horned Demon slammed the wheel hard. He turned around and strode away amidst the rumbling sound of the metal door. A layer of cold sweat had already accumulated on Hua Dian's back. He didn't want to have anything to do with this lunatic. He raised his hand to let the horned demon go, sending him off with his eyes. Luo Nan suddenly stood up on the Ray yacht on North Mountain Lake. He issued an order under Yin Li's blank gaze: prepare the teleportation array. I want to return to Xia City. Now. Yin Li shivered and quickly stood up to respond, anytime, mister. I've already arranged for people to rearrange the materials during the day, but for safety reasons, I'll have to ask you to do another test. I'll have the yacht go over right now. No need. I'm fine by myself. Luo Nan walked to the edge of the sun deck and kicked the heavy metal case that was placed there. The mechanical components immediately activated and adjusted their positions. The case's lid opened, and Luo Nan stood in the two shallow grooves that accommodated his feet. His body fell down slightly, and then he was lifted up by the body. Thousands of metal components corresponded to each other under the control of the AI. They revolved around Luo Nan's body and combined in many ways. They formed an exoskeleton armor that enveloped Luo Nan's entire body within 5 seconds. There are still some supplementary materials at Point B. I'm going there. Then I'll turn back to Xia City. You keep watch over the teleportation array. I should be back soon. What did he want to do? Chapter 769. Luo Nan relied on the spatial resonance connection between the transmission array and gear of the North Bank to construct a transit channel through the cloud world. He traveled through the void and returned to the main laboratory area of gear of the North Bank's underground 6th floor. Aside from the problem of energy consumption during resonance and jumps, as well as the wear and tear of the devices that carried the energy, everything was perfect. Successive experiments and practices conducted in Ban City and Spring City proved the reliability of this method. Such elusive methods were no longer enough to excite Luo Nan. His face buried behind the metal visor was without the slightest ripple. He just closed his eyes and adapted a bit to the slight discomfort caused by the long-distance spatial travel. The military-grade AI, Standard Bearer, automatically turned on the illumination power of the laboratory area when it sensed Luo Nan's return. It sent over some of the work progress of the AI's recent analysis. A continuous stream of information notifications rang out. The virtual screen on Luo Nan's retina kept popping up with titles and keywords. He wasn't in the mood to look at these right now. He ignored all of them. Speaking of which, Luo Nan hadn't been here for 3 or 4 days. The reason he gave to the outside world was to clean up the corresponding experimental equipment and make preparations to leave school. This reason was really weak. Whether it was the Xia City branch or the relevant personnel of the Mystic Arts Research Society, no one would believe it. But it didn't matter. No one would expose him. However, he received a few messages the moment he reconnected to the psychic wave network. Most of them came from He Yueyin and Bro Octopus. The others were fine, but the last message he received made Luo Nan's attention focus a bit. It was an electronic invitation. The interface design was quite exquisite. It seemed to be of a very high level. Looking at the signature on the interface, it came from the Fushan auction house. It was a completely logical and provocative target. To Mr. Luo Nan read the opening and his face behind the visor finally formed a cold arc. His gaze flickered as he ignored the meaningless, hypocritical, and polite words. He captured the most crucial information. The Jadeite Light. May 6th, set sail from Ban City. High Seas Auction. May 16th, special auction of the Jadeite Light. Relying on the electronic invitation, people could board the ultra-luxurious cruise ship, the Jadeite Light, on May 6th. They would travel by sea for 10 days and participate in the top-notch auction. Of course, guests who felt that time was precious could also take a private plane and arrive on the same day. The electronic invitation even had a list of auction items and a corresponding introduction. The name, Luo Yuandao Laboratory Coordinates and Supporting Equipment, was impressively listed. At first glance, it looked a bit crude compared to the other magnificent works of art. But in Luo Yuandao laboratory coordinates, it was the value of all the other auction items added together. Yes, the value referred to the value of the laboratory itself. Luo Yuandao had to. If the Fushan auction house and the designer of the retreat plans still believed that Luo Nan would be grasped by this sort of thing, then they would only be disappointed. Luo Nan had already found his grandfather's laboratory. He had used inconceivable methods to experience and feel the various mysteries within for himself. The laboratory coordinates held practically no meaning to Luo Nan. Bank Luo Laboratory of Luo Coordinates of the Laboratory of Coordinates of Laboratory of the Laboratory of Luo of Institute of Laboratory of Laboratory of the Institute of the Laboratory of the Luo Laboratory of Luo Nan immediately switched the interface. He would leave the invitation letter there for now. The premise for him to accept the invitation was to continue to feign civility with that whore, the goddess of fate. And in order to confirm this premise, he needed to do the corresponding verification. This was the reason why he rushed back from Ban City. Roy 1. Luo Nan called out softly. Though the sound waves were unable to transmit to his home, which was several dozen kilometers away, the psychic waves were able to reach far and wide. Roy 1 was doing her homework in her room. Her figure blurred and disappeared the moment she heard the call. She leaped into deep space. Luo Nan and Roy 1 cooperated flawlessly. They integrated the special configuration of gear of the North Bank to open a new spatial passageway. It just so happened to intersect with Roy 1's shuttle trajectory. Then they left the local spacetime together to cut into the cloud world. The transmission array erected above North Mountain Lake of Ban City actually had this function as well. But the scale and degree of rigor were far inferior to gear of the North Bank. Needless to say, there were unexpected risks from wear and tear. The fact that Luo Nan was able to consider this proved that his mind was quite calm. He was unexpectedly calm. The high-altitude air currents and surging clouds of the cloud world came head-on. They seemed monotonous, but they brought along a wealth of information about this world. However, Luo Nan was completely uninterested in these superficial things right now. He just spoke softly to Roy 1 beside him, "Let's go to our ambush." Roy 1 was able to sense Luo Nan's mood. She didn't say much. She immediately entered the special state of body and soul merging. In this state, she linked and resonated with the complex and chaotic multi-layered structure of the void. Then she cut open the scene of mist on the surface of the cloud world, revealing an entrance that led to the deeper layers of the labyrinth world. This exposed the gray, turbid, and chaotic maze of mist within. It was as if an ugly wound had been torn open in the cloud world. But this wound was rapidly healing. Luo Nan knew that time was of the essence. He quickly adjusted his breath and once again confirmed that the self-examination of the exoskeleton armor was normal. Then he dove head first inside. When he dove into the gray and gloomy turbid mist, the crack in the void closed up and was completely sealed. The corresponding light that came from the outside world also completely disappeared. Luo Nan no longer had anything to rely on. The only thing he could rely on was himself. The terrifying pressure within the mist labyrinth assaulted him at the same time. The configuration fragments numbered in the trillions and trillions of them formed a torrent of information that oppressed the mental plane. And the collapsing and shattering structure of the void itself created a destructive force that could crush and tear everything to shreds. It wanted to grind all things from source and non-source into dust and even into nothingness. Luo Nan very rarely entered this dangerous plane with his fleshly body. In fact, if he had entered with his fleshly body for the first time, there was a high probability that his body would have been smashed to pieces by now. Even now, Luo Nan faced such terrible environmental conditions. It was the same as playing a balancing game on the jagged edge of a meat grinder. The so-called balancing was the speed at which he pieced together the configuration fragments. It was the dynamic change between the destructive impact and interference of the powerful pressure in the surroundings. Luo Nan stood at the very center of the gray and white space. This place was like the simple and crude initial environment before the start of a virtual reality game. It was also like a rough house that didn't have any decorations at all. One could even see the texture of bricks and concrete that weren't all that exquisite. The radius of the space was roughly 30 meters or so. It was 10 times greater than the initial radius of 3 meters he sensed in the mist labyrinth. Of course, if one were to calculate the volume of the space, then it would be an expansion of over 3,000 times. If placed in the real world, it would be equivalent to a medium-sized shopping mall. Even if Luo Nan used reinforced concrete to construct this space, it would still be a rather large project. Moreover, Luo Nan used even more precise and complex methods. He used a jigsaw puzzle, a building block method. Luo Nan viewed the boundless and endless configuration fragments as raw materials. He pondered over the laws and rules that were completely different from the ordinary nature of matter. According to the nature of each fragment and particle, as well as his understanding of the configuration system, he pieced together these tiny, bizarre powder fragments that didn't even possess a physical body. He gradually strengthened their hardness and support, allowing them to grow, little by little under the destructive pressure, gradually expanding their range. Luo Nan went from slow to fast, from sluggish to smooth, from bewilderment to clarity over the course of 4 months. Finally, he constructed a foundation that he could live on. At the same time, it was a unique domain that allowed his own abilities to be put into practice. This method was very familiar, right? That's right. It was exactly the same construction method that Luo Yuan spoke about in the laboratory that belonged exclusively to Bo Qingwen. It was of the same origin. A son learning from a stepmother. This was a matter worthy of celebration, but it was also a reasonable matter. Luo Nan accepted the theory of the virtual brain system of the external neuron. He also received his mother's research papers and notes from Professor Pan. This was the most logical development. It was also the most comfortable karmic cycle. In this aspect, the goddess of fate wasn't too much of a bitch. Luo Nan hadn't flipped the table on the spot before. A large part of this factor was a buffer. Right now, Luo Nan wanted to start from this embryonic domain space. He wanted to verify whether or not there was a deeper, closer connection between this domain space and the laboratory that was built in the same way. Not just in terms of construction theory and method, but also on a more complex, more realistic level. The chance to prove that you aren't such a bitch has come. Luo Nan spoke to the goddess of fate. If there really was such a god in the unseen world, then it's the same dust-filled sandstorm. It's the same embodiment of the collapse of space-time. It's the same inventor, researcher, and theoretical source. Such a spectacle. Such elements. Could there be a second group on Earth or even in the surrounding regions? If there's such a clumsy and absurd coincidence, then you really are hopelessly bitchy. The goddess of fate didn't admit it. She didn't deny it either. Instead, she adopted her usual ambiguous posture. The powerful pressure of the dust-filled sandstorm suddenly intensified. At the same time, bluish-white electricity leaped up from the exoskeleton armor Luo Nan wore. The corresponding electromagnetic muscle structure warped and swelled. It connected with the vibrations transmitted from the powerful pressure in the surroundings. It collided with the vibrations transmitted from the powerful pressure in the surroundings. There were even more complex resonances and interference. A portion of the space outside Luo Nan's body warped and rippled amidst the crackling noise. There was a tendency to disintegrate once more. Luo Nan didn't even blink his eyes at this. TCH. There's an error in pure calculations. The ambush circle underestimated the physical laws of the electromagnetic configuration. Fine adjustments are certain. The problem is, even an idiot can guess it. Don't you find it disgusting to use it to tease me? Of course, the goddess of fate wouldn't respond. Luo Nan didn't count on it. In any case, the agitated emotional pressure that had accumulated in Luo Nan's heart was clearly alleviated amidst this treacherous conversation. Luo Nan was no longer anxious to obtain an answer. He just slightly adjusted his floating posture. He adopted a fist stance according to Gym Master Xiu's teachings. He hooked his hand at the distorted and rippling nothingness. Chapter 770. Rui Wen's figure disappeared into the chaotic void once more. It was unknown when she would reappear. Luo Nan panted heavily as he hovered in the central region of the ambush circle. He slowly spun around. The muscles of his entire body were twitching slightly, and he was sweating profusely. The life support module of the exoskeleton armor had long since lost its function. In fact, this armor was already in tatters. From time to time, the outer armor and parts would peel off, and then they would be drawn into the incorporeal vortex of warped waves. They would shatter and shatter until they were annihilated into nothingness. Rui Wen had never truly struck during the training process. All of the damage to the exoskeleton armor did not come from ordinary physical attacks. Instead, it came from the distortion and erosion of the ambush circle and the sandstorm even further outside. This was the rejection of the rules. Even if Luo Nan wore 100 layers of armor, as long as the force exertion, operation, and even the existence itself did not conform to the jointing rules of this domain space, he would inevitably suffer a powerful repulsive pressure. This was the case for Luo Nan and the tools he had transformed with his own hands. There was no need to talk about treating outsiders like this. And this was the fundamental reason why this space was named the Ambush Circle. Luo Nan's sparring with Rui Wen had unwittingly gone on for nearly half an hour. Even though the weak electromagnetic muscle structure could not hold on long ago and turned into flying ash, Rui Wen did not stop. This seemed to deviate from Luo Nan's goal in coming here. The problem was that he really could not stop in time. The glaring mistake was right before his eyes. He could not turn a blind eye to it, right? Whether it was the ambush circle or the amalgamation of the exoskeleton armor and the electromagnetic muscle structure, they were all key props used to deal with Gong Qi. The running in and coordination between them were exceptionally important. Luo Nan needed to make them integrate as perfectly as possible. At the very least, they would not drag him down in this extreme battle. True perfection did not exist. Of course, Luo Nan wanted everything to operate according to the established theoretical rules. He wanted this space to become like President Ouyang's logic world, a basically perfect and self-consistent extraordinary domain. But whether it was the exoskeleton armor, the electromagnetic muscle structure, or even his own skeleton, they were all constructed under the physical rules of the local spacetime. There would certainly be inconsistencies and areas of incompatibility when placed in the ambush circle constructed purely from configuration theory. There would even be conflicts in the underlying structure. Every problem that appeared required Luo Nan to rack his brains to think of a solution or a temporary compromise plan. Hiss. Rui Wen appeared behind Luo Nan like a ghost. She gave Luo Nan a light pat on the shoulder. Luo Nan shuddered. The reaction of his body and soul was out of sync. He wanted to drive the exoskeleton armor to exert force, but this caused a small portion of his back armor to tear off. Then it disintegrated into nothingness. Phew, let's stop here for now. The consumption of physical strength was secondary. The consumption of mental strength and energy was the reason why Luo Nan called a halt. Rui Wen stopped in the first instance. She stood quietly in front of Luo Nan. Luo Nan took off the exoskeleton armor with great difficulty. In fact, this toy was no longer in shape after it was taken off. It could pretty much be thrown into the junkyard. I still have to keep this. When I get back, I'll let the flag bearer test it and make a combat analysis model. Thank you for making this trip. Also, help me apply for 10 sets of components. Since there are problems, we have to solve them in time. Strive to have the version updated within 3 days. As for me, I still want to stay here for a while. At the very least, I need to stabilize the trap. Rui Wen still didn't speak. She maintained her usual silence. She just looked over seriously, showing her worry for Luo Nan's state. Luo Nan laughed as he rubbed her head. Relax. Our hearts are linked. I'll call you at any time, and you'll be on call. There definitely won't be any problems. The focus of today's work isn't here. He coaxed and persuaded Rui Wen to leave. Luo Nan stayed in the ambush circle by himself. He didn't make any particularly large movements. He just circulated his soul strength to make corrections to the building block splicing rules based on the various inharmonious problems he discovered earlier. Then he took the inexhaustible and inexhaustible materials of the configuration fragments in the surroundings to replenish them one after another. This was mental work and meticulous work. Before he knew it, more than 2 hours had passed. The surrounding gray space gradually broke away from the state of warping and rippling. Especially the border region, which had been eroded by nearly a quarter, was pushed back once more. The border was basically maintained in stability. However, the internal construction mechanism had undergone a subtle change compared to 3 hours ago. There's never enough time. Luo Nan felt a bit dizzy when he exhaled once more. It's okay. I did some sampling and analysis work in passing. Whether it's the concentration, the density, or the frequency at which specific configurations appear, there really isn't much of a difference between the two sides of the sandstorm. If it's under the effect of the same force, then with sufficient agitation, many phenomena can be explained. The first verification has passed. You've got one less excuse. Luo Nan accepted this result with an ordinary heart. He gave a thumbs up to a certain hoar god in the nothingness. Then he followed the laws of the North Bank's gear and returned to the local spacetime. When he appeared again, he was already in a narrow and gloomy space. This was the interior of the withered tree in the sandbar a kilometer away from the North Bank gear. This was the private space that belonged to his parents, and it also belonged to him. It was also another destination of Luo Nan's in Xia City. The anchor point between the tree hole space and the cloud world was the lounge at the bottom level. Luo Nan sat on the circular chair with great precision. His back leaned against the wall of the tree. Combined with the dizziness from the jump in space-time, it was as if he had just woken up from a short nap. Everything that happened just now was just a dream of nothingness. Unfortunately, right now isn't the time to dream. It's time to work. The second verification has begun. Luo Nan stood up and held on to the inner wall of the tree hole. He walked up to the second level of the tree hole at an extremely slow speed. According to the original design, this place should be a workshop. Back then, his mother and that person should have let their imaginations run wild in this narrow space, obtaining inspiration, and then? Was there a deeper function? Luo Nan wouldn't have thought this much before today. But when he was in his grandfather's laboratory, when he saw the building structure at the end of the two circular corridors, although it was already warped and deformed, it still maintained a general shape. When he heard the fragments of events from the past that Luo Yuan spoke of, his thoughts couldn't help but grow wings, extend claws, and anchored this place anew. The tree hole plan. Why a tree hole? Luo Yuan's explanation was to show off their affection. Perhaps this fellow knew a portion of the North Bank gear and even the matters of the ancient tree sandbar. He knew that this place, designed and built by his mother, contained a special emotional meaning. But could it be that there wasn't a more realistic meaning? Luo Nan touched the structure of the tree hole bit by bit. He was able to feel the rigid yet moist sensation of the dried-up tree soaked in water vapor. He was able to distinguish the tough texture of the biochemical filler in the middle. He was even able to grasp a bit of the regular molecular chain structure. But outside of these surface and internal structures, there weren't any configuration fragments that Luo Nan imagined, that he hoped would be mixed with the texture of the spacetime structure. It was just like the laboratory in the wasteland. It was just like the ambush circle in the cloud world. The facts proved that it wasn't like that at all. Could it be that I was wrong? Luo Nan used nearly 5 minutes to dawdle from the first level to the second level. His fingerprints were rubbed flat on the withered tree bark, and the precision of his mental senses was raised to the limit. But he still didn't discover anything. Instead, the aftereffects of using his senses to correct the configuration design in the ambush circle gradually appeared. His exhaustion and drowsiness increased, and his attention showed signs of scattering. Phew! Luo Nan spat out a mouthful of turbid air. He opened the hidden viewing window on the second level of the tree hole, allowing the night and the cool wind of the end of spring to pour in. He stood in front of the window, staring blankly at the faint silhouette of gears building in the dusky night. His mind went blank for a moment before his thoughts came back. Perhaps he really was thinking too much. Luo Nan pressed his temples and began to consider things from a different perspective. After all, the symbol of the tree hole was far too conspicuous. Luo Yuan was clearly an insider. His mother and that person might have hidden the secret of the tree hole plan here. Even if they did hide it, they might not be able to hide it from Luo Yuan's search. After all, this was Acumen College. It was a public area that anyone could come to. It wasn't suitable to be a place to hide secrets. But wasn't gear itself the greatest and best hidden secret? Luo Nan's emotions and reason were fighting. He slapped his forehead and forced himself to be a bit more clear-headed. He considered things from a more realistic perspective. Didn't the space of the tree hole undergo a secret transformation around the year 87? And the person who transformed it was suspected to be a staff member of Yen Hong's laboratory at the time. He used this place as a secret hideout to do some shady business that no one knew about. Luo Nan had discovered this the first time he arrived at the tree hole, but he didn't have any leads later on. He had a few guesses in his mind, but it was hard to verify them. He could only leave them unsettled. Now that his mind was open, he couldn't help but think, could it be that Luo Yuan was the one who transformed this place and hid it here? No. Most of the intelligence indicated that Luo Yuan had been roaming the wilderness all this time after his grandfather's laboratory was shut down. He continued his research in the fields of genes, cloning, human body modification, and so on. He even established the Gene Exchange, a large black market that specialized in supplying living laboratory consumables. He probably didn't have the time or energy to hide in Yen Hong's laboratory for a long period of time. Moreover, he clearly didn't walk the path of the archetype format. Luo Nan denied his own wild imagination and let out a breath of relief. But as his thoughts spun, a certain possibility that he had been pondering over in the pit of his heart suddenly emerged from the shadows of his thoughts. Actually, there was still one more person. Chapter 771. The table and the viewing window faced each other. They relied on the inner wall of the withered tree to form a semi-cylindrical space. It didn't feel cramped at all. As for the low stool below the table, it was sculpted according to the natural protrusion of the withered tree. It was filled with the interest of nature, and it was extremely comfortable. It embodied first-rate design and craftsmanship. Luo Nan sat on the stool, and the table was level with Luo Nan's chest. It was a bit high for him, but it should be a relatively comfortable position for an adult in this narrow space. Luo Nan sat here with his elbows resting on the table. The circular base of the electronic photo frame was right in front of him. With a light swipe, the light from the projection area pushed away the surrounding darkness, revealing the smiling appearance of his mother leaning against the tree all those years ago. Luo Nan looked at it in a daze. He looked at the brows and eyes that were vaguely similar to his own, but they were brighter and sharper. The finger pointed towards the camera seemed to be greeting him. Yep. It wasn't a normal hello or the like. It was more like a hurry up and catch up type of urging. Luo Nan maintained his sitting posture while leaning on the table. His mind inexplicably scattered once more. He suddenly thought of something. Back in the day, why did the fellow who hid here for who knows how many years keep this electronic photo frame? And why did he place it in the most conspicuous place? Every night, in the deep and silent darkness, did that person do the same as he did right now? Within the faint light of the projection, he received the smile and encouragement that came from the distant past. Luo Nan's heart suddenly spasmed. This even drained away most of the strength in his body, to the point where he was no longer willing to think about anything. He no longer maintained his stance, allowing his body to collapse. His chin rested on the back of his hand that was resting on the table. He continued to look at his mother's bright and clear smile. He didn't mind that his consciousness continued to slide into a hazy and muddle-headed state. In this way, perhaps the distance in the river of time would shorten. The barrier between life and death would warp. There would no longer be a boundary between reality and nothingness between him and his mother. He could make a fair demand of his mother, give me Just give me a hint, okay? Actually, I'm very smart. His mother within the lights still had that same smile. Luo Nan looked stupidly. He didn't know when, but the swaying light of water and mist blocked his front, blurring the silhouette of the image. Luo Nan's consciousness became drowsy and dark within this blurry light and shadow. He hadn't had a good rest for nearly 100 hours. In Ban City, he had to bear the double pressure of being pressed for time and a powerful enemy. In the wasteland, for the sake of his grandfather's laboratory, he had a battle of wits with Luo Yuan and true god extraordinaries. In the misty labyrinth, he had also made high-precision repairs to the ambush circle. He had indeed reached his limit. Therefore, in the blurry light and shadow of life and death, in the narrow space where his mother's sense still lingered, the tide-like emotions finally overflowed the high ground of his will and dragged him into a dark dream. An unknown amount of time passed before a rustling sound entered Luo Nan's ear. It stimulated Luo Nan, causing him to wake up. Though there were noises, there were no signs of danger. Luo Nan was still lying on the table. His thoughts were a bit sluggish, but his mental senses naturally mapped the situation of the target into his mind. Jerry? Yes, it was Xie Juanping's godson, his eldest nephew, the muskrat that had an extraordinary interest in the tree hole. The little thing would often travel through the tree hole. It seemed to use the tree hole as a base of operations. Moreover, it loved cleanliness. It hated that it couldn't clean this place until it was spotless. Back then, Luo Nan and Xie Juanping suspected that someone once resided in the tree hole. They installed a camera and captured the little thing. Xie Juanping even engaged in a long and drawn-out battle. In the end, it ended with Jerry surrendering to Rui Wen. Whether it was Luo Nan or Xie Juanping, they both wanted to figure out the physiological or psychological mechanism behind Jerry's connection with the tree hole. But in the end, they left the matter unsettled. They just knew that the little thing's intelligence was outstanding among its kind. Coupled with its athletic ability that far exceeded its peers, there was quite a bit of a possibility of it being deformed. However, over the past few months, it had long since proven that its temperament was mild. It had been injected with all sorts of vaccines, so it wasn't a threat at all. Part of the muskrat's habit of building caves was reflected in Jerry's care of the tree hole. Generally speaking, muskrat caves had two exits. One was underwater, and the other was on the shore. Jerry dug an exit at the bottom of the tree hole that led to the lake below the sandbar. Even though he was quite familiar with gear, he wouldn't go through the underwater corridor, a dangerous area where people came and went. Instead, he would come through the waterway. A third of the nearly 10-meter-long slanted tunnel was above water level, even during the high water season. Jerry leaped in from the water, running and shaking his tail all the way. By the time he entered the tree hole, his fur was more or less in a half-dry state. Even so, he still shook violently on the stone steps at the bottom of the tree hole. He only climbed up the stone steps after the water droplets were almost all shaken off. The little fellow's senses were quite sharp. He felt that something was off in the resting room on the first floor of the tree hole. He lowered his body and shrank back, but he soon determined a familiar aura and relaxed. He shook his plump body and made his way straight up to the second floor of the tree hole. Luo Nan didn't mind such a chance encounter. This wasn't the first or second time they met. On the contrary, Jerry appeared quite excited when he saw Luo Nan. He simply charged over and crashed into the inner wall of the tree before turning back. He didn't care about his half-wet, half-dry fur and fiercely rubbed against Luo Nan's calf. Having a lively little thing by his side was much better than being alone and depressed. Luo Nan hooked his lips. Though he was still suppressed by his heavy emotions, he was still lying on the table, unwilling to get up. He lowered a hand and scratched the little fellow's body twice. Other than that, the half-wet, half-dry fur didn't feel as good as when it was dry and fluffy. Luo Nan saw that Jerry still wanted to rub against his body, and a layer of blue and white electric flames flickered between his fingers. It pierced the little fellow, causing his long bristles to explode. The electrical resistance of the fur would decrease greatly when it came into contact with water. The damage from the electric current passing through would be greater. However, Luo Nan's control was extremely effective. He used electromagnetic configuration interference to temporarily create a nearly insulating physical structure. Aside from an increase in temperature, there were no other effects when the electric current passed through. Instead, the electric current turned into waves of warm wind as Luo Nan fiddled with it. Jerry's fur quickly became fluffy and dry under this combing. Such methods proved that Luo Nan's special training in Ban City over the past few days had remarkable results. Jerry knew that Luo Nan wouldn't hurt him, so he stayed quiet for a few seconds as the electric current flowed back and forth. He waited for his body to return to being dry before he whimpered and rubbed against his pants, asking for a hug. Of course, Rui-1 was the #1 target of reverence and intimacy in the little fellow's circle of life. Perhaps it was because she was the first person to introduce him. Next, Luo Nan and Cat Eyes were more or less the same. Cat Eyes usually played with him a bit more, while Luo Nan was clearly affected by Rui-1's radiation. As for the little fellow's biological father, Xie Junping, he was ranked 4th. It was already quite good. However, Luo Nan really didn't want to budge right now. He just used his fingertips to stroke the little fellow's short and pointed head. Jerry had a rough understanding of Luo Nan's state after a moment. He displayed his subjective initiative, grabbing Luo Nan's pants and pulling them down. He borrowed a bit of strength to leap up onto the stool and onto Luo Nan's back. He jumped down from Luo Nan's right shoulder and just happened to land in the empty space of the table where Luo Nan's right arm hung down. He displayed an agility that didn't match his plump body and most of his kind. Just how big was the table? Jerry's body was over 20 centimeters long and he was quite stout. Even though his tail was swinging outside and his body was still curled up, he still occupied a small half of the space. His long bristles streaked across Luo Nan's cheeks and even the corners of his eyes, forcing Luo Nan to move back. This naturally broke his stance and made it impossible for him to lie on the table like a corpse. Luo Nan spoke halfway, but he wasn't really angry. He couldn't lie on his stomach right now, but he didn't have much strength. His left elbow was still resting on the table, supporting his cheeks. He raised his hanging right hand and pressed down heavily twice on Jerry's head. His fingertips could feel the friction between the little fellow's flesh and skull. Jerry's skin was coarse and thick, so he didn't mind it at all. His throat even emitted a gurgling sound. He seemed quite comfortable. Luo Nan's mood improved a bit with this silly and adorable fellow. His hands became much gentler. The little fellow felt that it wasn't stimulated enough at this time. His curled body swayed back and forth without stopping. His tail, which had grown to the length of his body, was swinging around with a crackling sound. "Be good, Jerry." Luo Nan added a bit of strength and pressed the little fellow's head against the table, indicating that he should be a bit more well-behaved. "You need to be polite. Look, this is right in front of my mother's eyes. What should I call you?" Luo Nan was distracted pondering over the question of how to address him, and Jerry took the opportunity to exert strength to struggle free. His eyeballs swiveled a few times, and he was able to clearly see the projected photo to the side with great difficulty. A low gurgling sound came from his throat, and his chubby body stood up like a human. He only used his relatively strong hind legs to support himself. His short front claws reached out, as if he wanted to fiddle with the area of light and shadow in front of him. He absolutely couldn't touch his mother's photo carelessly. Luo Nan pressed down on Jerry's head again, and the little fellow's plump body was nearly unable to maintain balance. He swayed left and right, nearly falling off the table. Even so, his front claws were still waving about. His throat went squeak squeak and gurgling without end. "Be good, or else I'll throw you out." Luo Nan's tone was a bit more severe, and Jerry immediately calmed down. He stood obediently, and the range of his front claws' movements became smaller. In this way, Luo Nan discovered that Jerry's movements and posture didn't resemble a photo. It seemed to be making bigger gestures, and it even pointed and wrote and drew in the middle. It was full of humanity. This is imitating me. Luo Nan understood a bit. The little fellow's eyesight wasn't good. He saw the projection area of the electronic photo frame, but he felt that it was too small. It was different from the virtual work area that Luo Nan normally used. He was commanding Luo Nan to enlarge it. But wasn't this little fellow's memory a bit too good? Didn't he show it a few times? Forget it. Luo Nan would just treat it as coaxing a child. The electronic photo frame on the table was quite old-fashioned. It was impossible to enlarge it in the projection area, so Luo Nan handled the errand. He mobilized the external neuron to open up his own virtual work area. The adaptive function of the projection software was quite impressive. It detected that the area behind him was a circular arc, and it automatically adjusted itself. It was perfectly embedded into the concave space of the tree wall. The boundary was seamless, and it didn't receive any special spatial interference. It looked quite pleasing to the eye. How is it? Comfortable now? Luo Nan scratched the back of Jerry's head. The fur underneath the long spiky hair was soft and warm. It felt absolutely wonderful to the touch. Jerry also calmed down, obediently returning to its crouching and curled up position. It just raised its head and looked at the image of the virtual work area. Bit by bit, it was extremely satisfied. It also seemed to have a very focused appearance. The image in the virtual work area, the psychic diagram, and the configuration design diagram, were all complex and cumbersome. Only the heavens knew what the little fellow could see. Luo Nan's finger moved up and down along with Jerry's head. Occasionally, it would even sway back and forth. He just felt that it was funny. Look at you like this. I'll just call you Mouse from now on. Gurgling sounds came from Jerry's throat. Its head continued to sway up and down, left and right. Luo Nan still wanted to pull it back a few times, but his palm and fingers stayed in contact for a long time. He felt that the temperature of the little fellow's body clearly changed under its fur. Chapter 772. Jerry's body temperature rose extremely quickly. Luo Nan felt that Jerry's body temperature had risen by at least 4 or 5 degrees in the span of a few breaths. Luo Nan was proficient in the mental side of perception, so he was able to grasp this bit of precision. The body temperature of a mammal hovered around 37 degrees. Exceeding this range would cause a clear change in the body's functions. Most of the proteins and enzymes within an organism's body would be deactivated when the temperature entered the range of 40 to 41 degrees. The body's various tissues and organs, especially the brain, would be severely damaged. This wasn't a good sign in any case. Jerry. Luo Nan picked up the little fellow and examined it carefully. The little fellow was a bit unwilling. Its 4 limbs struggled and its head kept turning towards the direction of the virtual work area. It looked like it hadn't seen enough. This was quite strange. Any mammal would wither at a temperature above 40 degrees. How could it be like this little fellow, still brimming with vigor? His strength was a bit greater than before. Was this the reason for the distortion? Luo Nan increased the strength in his hand. His palm and fingers slid across Jerry's plump body. There were also high-energy electromagnetic short waves that were transmitted densely. Luo Nan sensed the changes in Jerry's fur, muscles, bones, and even internal organs. Yes, the little fellow's heart was beating very quickly. His muscles were twitching intensely, but they hadn't lost their activity. His control was still there. His blood flow was very smooth. His bodily functions weren't damaged. His body's thermoregulatory center and other cooling functions were still functioning normally. Jerry's body temperature continued to rise during the examination. It had long since surpassed the upper limit that a mammal could endure. Under these circumstances, Jerry's body inevitably underwent some changes. Luo Nan felt that the little fellow's soft fur had become much harder. It was even a bit prickly. Its body seemed to have slightly expanded. Then, where was the pyrogen? It was within the flesh and bones, yet it was outside of the usual functions? This was a bit like an extraordinary power. If he were to use configuration theory to explain it, Luo Nan's mind suddenly went blank for a moment. When he came back to his senses, his thinking pattern and range naturally expanded. He added the element of configuration analysis. He looked at Jerry again. The feeling was completely different from a few seconds ago. The little fellow had transformed from an individual that could be perceived normally into a complex living system. This system possessed a basic mechanism that could guarantee the growth and circulation of life. At the same time, various organizational components were embedded within the logic of a higher-level configuration system. At the very least, there was an intermittent connection. A lot of information flashed through Luo Nan's mind in an instant, but it was very hard to make it clear. Right now, all that was left in his perception was Jerry's body structure, including his flesh and blood, skin and hair, internal organs and bones, those seemingly right but not quite right details. Just like his previous design in the saltwater lake in the wilderness, there seemed to be no connection at all, but on a higher level, a magical structure was built. Jerry's throat made a goo-goo sound, and he was in a dumbfounded state. The more Luo Nan looked at it, the clearer it became. Under normal circumstances, this sort of structure would not appear. However, under this extreme state of extreme heat, all sorts of minute changes piled up together to form a blurry yet vaguely conforming picture. Why is it blurry? Why does it seem so? Was it innate, or was it modified after birth? Luo Nan's fingertips streaked down from the back of Jerry's head, following along the joints of Jerry's spine. Luo Nan's train of thought gradually became clear. Perhaps, it was a problem of growth and development. After all, the cells of a living body changed at an extremely fast rate. Wasn't there a saying, every person is a completely different person from their childhood self? Skin, blood, muscles, and even every cell in the body will undergo a complete renewal at a different frequency. Practically not a single cell in an adult's body was left over from childhood. Humans were like this, and muskrats were the same. Because of this, Luo Nan paid more attention to the nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord. After all, they had the longest lifespans. They were practically unaffected by the changes in growth and development, and they were the most able to embody the main train of thought of this special structure. As his thoughts converged, the distributed image of Jerry's nervous system was mapped into Luo Nan's mind. Luo Nan was limited by the precision of his senses and the level of his clairvoyance. This sort of scan was not completely accurate, but Luo Nan was able to grasp the familiar structure within just by looking at the distribution of fragments. Luo Nan didn't know why he laughed out loud. In fact, right now he was a complete contradiction. His train of thought was clear, but his emotions were even more chaotic. His mental senses steadily deepened, but his hands on Jerry's body were trembling. His control over his strength had problems. What did this sort of test result mean? What did it mean? Jerry suddenly screeched loudly. Luo Nan had strangled him to the point of pain. Luo Nan came back to his senses and hurriedly withdrew his strength. He fiercely blew a few mouthfuls of air at Jerry, who was about to be strangled to death. Then he placed the little fellow upright on the table. The little fellow looked at him stupidly. Luo Nan managed to control his emotions with great difficulty. He stooped down until his face was practically touching Jerry's. Be good, Jerry. Uncle will help you sort out a bit. Goo. Yes. You're the one helping me. Help me. Luo Nan subconsciously used an imperative sentence. The little fellow might not be able to understand, but he was infected by the atmosphere and became abnormally obedient and quiet. Luo Nan took another deep breath and gripped Jerry's body once more. At the same time, his god gear and body gear coupled and interfered. The material plane and the mental plane blended together, forming a slight fluctuation that permeated into Jerry's flesh and blood. Correspondingly, the disjointed and disjointed configuration elements appeared in front of him one after another. Since Luo Nan had already probed down to the level of the nervous system, he was able to roughly understand the train of thought of the original remodeler. Luo Nan's half-year of high-intensity configuration theory and practical study provided him with a large number of feasible plans. Luo Nan's hand gently caressed Jerry's body, and the little fellow's throat let out a gurgling sound. He had a rather comfortable appearance. He was completely unaware of the earth-shattering changes that were happening to his own body on a certain level. Luo Nan's hand was still shaking at this time. He was unable to control it no matter what, and it was the same on the mental plane. He had no choice but to slow down as much as possible. But the more he did this, the more his overly active mind advanced. He had already predicted the final result halfway through the combing process. Every subsequent change was just a practical verification. Jerry was muddled, and Luo Nan stared intently into its eyes. The little fellow's eyesight was terrible, but it was very comfortable right now. Its eyes were squinted into slits. But as the combing and remodeling process progressed, a layer of marvelous radiance clearly converged between the pupils of Luo Nan's squinted eyes. This was the luster of life energy, and it represented a string of deeply hidden information. The blurry configuration picture became clear and definite under Luo Nan's adjustments. Luo Nan held Jerry in his arms once again without hesitation. He adjusted the direction, letting Jerry look directly at the virtual work area that had always interested him. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, Luo Nan's heart beat more than 30 times in these 3 seconds. The little fellow seemed to feel his urgent mood, and it let out a light cry. Its dazed eyes clearly emitted a tangible radiance that struck the virtual work area in front of it. A marvelous structure expanded from here on out. The external neuron hidden deep within Luo Nan's brain spontaneously emitted a brilliant electric flame. Luo Nan's heart contracted and expanded, and his mind unconsciously became a field of blankness. By the time he came back to his senses, the projected area had already returned to the initial interface of the flexible e-ink screen for some unknown reason. Luo Nan's attention was projected, and the drawing software that had always existed within opened up once more, presenting a blank page. It was as if an invisible hand had painted concise lines on the surface a second later, gradually presenting a brand new interface. Luo Nan was familiar with this sort of situation. The initial design drafts were always like this. Of course, many people were used to using ready-made materials to stitch together. Hand painting was very old-fashioned. Huh? Luo Nan's eyes unconsciously widened as the interface gradually took shape. This interface felt very familiar, yet it was also very strange. He was familiar with the form of the interface. It had an extremely simple and even crude style. There were only 2 options juxtaposed together. Many UI interfaces were like this. Luo Nan had come into contact with one recently. It was the credit evaluation system of the Vagrant Exchange. It was practically the same. However, the words were different. The words used on the hand-drawn interface were the structure and grammar of hieroglyphics, but they were specious. Normal people certainly wouldn't be able to understand them, even if they had been influenced by the East Asian culture for many years. Luo Nan was able to get a general idea because he had been dealing with it recently. These were the words of the virtual brain system. They came from an unknown civilization. Actually, Luo Nan had never learned these words, but the mysterious, character structure that became the core of the formatting theory system was like a translation device. It directly mapped the general meaning into his mind. For example, the current interface presented a sequence of options. The first one meant, click on me if you understand it. The next one meant, it's okay if you don't understand it. This was no doubt a tease, but Luo Nan couldn't laugh. He stared blankly for quite a while. Finally, he reached out and pressed on the first option. The interface, which felt more like a simple design blueprint, actually had an interactive function. The interface immediately changed, switching to a blank page and writing anew. The series of strokes were quite fluent. The fellow who drew the interface should have already grasped this type of language quite well. This string of words belonged to an unknown civilization. It was like the subject of a slide. It was arranged in a relatively large font, occupying the entire interface. If Luo Nan's understanding and translation were correct, then the meaning of the words was General Education Level Test Simulation System. There was also a line of smaller font below. Chapter 773. Luo Nan was stupefied as he looked at the simple text interface. The large characters on top were fine, but the small characters below were completely incomprehensible. 100-year sequence? What the hell? The external neuron continued to radiate electricity within his brain, showing that it was still in operation. Luo Nan originally believed that the external neuron, which had developed the virtual brain system, had basically exhausted its deep mysteries. But now he discovered that there was clearly a different kind of information hidden at the bottom, and it was being gradually loaded right now. The process of forming the hand-drawn interface was actually the process of loading. 3 seconds later, the words, General Education, faded away and was replaced by the same hand-drawn, draft-style interface. It was still in a minimalist mode, but the options were a bit more complicated. What appeared in order were the 4 choice categories of culture, society, skills, and true teachings. Luo Nan tried to look at the items under each category before the interface was completely formed. However, the 3 categories of culture, society, skills, and true teachings were completely non-selectable states. At first, Luo Nan believed that it was because the interface hadn't finished loading yet. But when the interface was completely drawn and he tried them one by one, he confirmed that he could only select the true teachings category and nothing more. There were a total of 5 options on the true teachings category's second-level menu. If Luo Nan's identification was correct, they were probably internal cultivation, truth reaching, creation, technique deployment, and configuration. Some of these words were familiar, some were unfamiliar, but they were all brimming with the meaning of extraordinary cultivation. However, only the configuration category was an optional state. There was only one choice, and Luo Nan only chose that one. He clicked once more, and the interface that refreshed this time was no longer in hand-drawn mode. Instead, it was an extremely complex 3-dimensional diagram. It clearly belonged to the domain of the configuration system, but it was only a relatively simple static structure. There were also questions and options on the side of the diagram. This was a freaking multiple-choice question. Please select a basic configuration that is not suitable to be added to the main diagram design. The options were 4 sets of simple configuration diagrams. Ha! Luo Nan laughed involuntarily, but his breath didn't have a hint of happiness. There was only absurdity and resentment. Test me. You test me. You have the face to test me. At this moment, Luo Nan no longer understood who was the one who had set up these mysterious arrangements. His brain had grown for 16 years in vain. He suddenly stood up, his entire body tensed up, to the point that Jerry let out another muffled cry. The little guy's glowing eyes had already deviated from the virtual workspace, but at this time, the hidden database in the external neuron had already been loaded. It didn't matter whether or not the little guy's gaze shone on him. Luo Nan loosened his grip and let the little fellow jump down. This was to prevent Luo Nan from strangling him to death in his excitement. After freeing his hands, he had nowhere to put them. He spun around and finally raised his arms, wanting to grab the non-existent figure in the tree hole where light and shadow intertwined. What kind of lousy joke is this? Luo Nan's muffled roar shook the tree hollow with a buzzing sound, but no one answered him. Jerry had never seen such an uncle before. He shrank in the corner, not daring to show his head. According to the adaptive function, the virtual workspace embedded in the curved tree wall displayed the so-called proficiency test interface. It remained the same. No, that wasn't right either. A blood-red countdown interface suddenly popped up under Luo Nan's manic gaze. There were also corresponding words, no response actions detected. Do you want to give up on this mock exam? It has been detected that the examinee is not suited to the difficulty of the question bank. The version will revert to the popular version. Huh. There was still a countdown. It wasn't just in the center of the interface that was conspicuous. There was clearly a countdown for the entire set of questions in the upper left corner of the interface. The basic unit of time in the unknown civilization, if converted to seconds, would be approximately 5 seconds. Luo Nan had looked at the database for a long time, so he could barely recognize these professional symbols like numbers. The total countdown in the upper left corner, when converted to Earth time, was approximately an hour. As for the current countdown timer on the interface, looking at the blood-red characters, it was already the second to last character. It would reach 0 in approximately 10 seconds. Even though Luo Nan didn't understand the difference between the verified version and the popular version, and he didn't understand what bullshit the 100-year sequence was, he knew that he couldn't continue being willful under these restrictions. The only thing in front of him was a rigid system, not a living person. He rushed forward with large strides and clicked on the second option before the final flash of the blood-red countdown timer. The exam simulation system calmly flipped the page. The previous blood-red warning was completely erased, revealing the next question. It was another multiple-choice question with dreg difficulty. You want to use this to stump me? Reality proved that just looking at the previous foundational questions and making light conclusions was incorrect. Luo Nan's emotions were in turmoil and he wasn't in his best state. Luo Nan instinctively reached out his hand to touch it. His finger streaked across the projected area, bringing forth chaotic ripples. And at this time, a brand new handwriting appeared. Moreover, it had already been replaced with the words that Luo Nan was familiar with since childhood. Luo Nan's finger retracted as if it had been scorched by fire, making way for the trajectory of the words to appear. He took another step back to expand his field of vision, allowing him to see the meaning of the words more clearly. Pass. You're as smart as I thought you were. 2 exclamation marks were poked there. There was clearly an emotion that soared between the lines of the words. Luo Nan's body was still stiff, but his consciousness was already drifting absent-mindedly. He didn't know how to react. He watched dumbly as the words disappeared and new content appeared. Are you 20 years old right now? 30 years old? Are you married? Do you have children? Is the Earth still in a free state? Or have you already faced the starry sky and entered the 100-year sequence? In any case, being able to find this hidden piece of information amidst a series of coincidences was quite a feat. As a father, I hope that you have read this information in your leisure time while reminiscing about the past. I hope that you have occasionally patched up this missing link while admiring my messiah-like grandeur. But if you are still a person tangled in pain right now, harboring a loathing for me in your heart, you are struggling amidst the confusing clues, then I ask you to forgive my incompetence. In the end, I wasn't able to realize my predetermined plan. Perhaps I have already foolishly died in forbearance and concealment. It is impossible for me to shine glory into your life. The corner of Luo Nan's mouth twitched slightly. There was a lot of information that he didn't understand, but he didn't have the slightest intention of probing it. He needed to control his surging emotions, to control his heart that was about to explode. He had already exhausted all of his strength. The words continued to appear. I don't have anything else to help you with. I can only show you the path I once walked, the process of me searching for the answer. Though the path is dark and rugged, I know that your mother's soul has always been there. She lent me her talent and wisdom to pave the long road that leads to the ultimate answer within the labyrinth of nothingness. However, my slow-witted self has wasted far too much time in the end. Li Wei, remember this name. This unwelcome guest from beyond the heavens has already arrived. I can only hastily sever this smooth road and welcome an unknown fate. Here I write. I only hope that you will like this present. Happy birthday. The signature was Luo Zhongheng. The date was June 18, 2090. Luo Nan was nailed in place like a stake. He looked at the signature all the way until the interface and the words disappeared. Then a new scene appeared. It was a double helix structure similar to DNA. However, the nodes on it weren't some ATCG. Instead, they were miniature hand-drawn sketches. They seemed to be divided into 2 routes that intertwined and influenced each other. Luo Nan didn't have the heart to look at the specifics. He stood there in a daze until his frantic heartbeat and surging blood made his entire body numb. Only then did he make a move. He subconsciously raised his hand and brought up the perpetual calendar. He found June 18, 2090. His birthday was June 16. Then, was this 2 days later? Was it here? It was only a few dozen kilometers away from where he was at the time. Luo Nan took a deep breath. He wanted to go forward and bring up those messages from before. But just as he took a step, his knees inexplicably went soft. He staggered and even bumped into the stool under the table. He was in such a sorry state. Luo Nan lowered his head and bent his body. He pressed down on the stool and suddenly laughed hoarsely. Is this a whitewash? Luo Zhongheng, you want to whitewash my father? All right, I'll give you a chance. Come out. Come out right now. I can think about it. I can try to forgive you. This is the chance. Come out. Come out. Chapter 774. It's late at night in Ban City. The clouds were still eternally bright, and the originally cloudy environment became even more restless and uneasy because of the sun hanging high in the sky. Snake Tongue floated in the air, her spirit body becoming increasingly illusory and unreal. Sometimes, a gust of wind blew, and her figure seemed to fluctuate and disperse, as if she could transform into the clouds at any time. Gong Qi was at Snake Tongue's side, listening to the strange collapsing sounds that came from the depths of the surging cold currents of clouds. After a moment, he smiled faintly and said, "The clouds and the sun seem to be in harmony, but in fact, they are far from being separated. It's like this on Earth, and it's even worse here. Two originally unrelated spacetime, for some reason, are continuously interfering and colliding. This is actually a great help to us." Snake Tongue was silent, but the collapsing sounds were becoming increasingly clear. This is the fluctuation transmitted by spacetime interference. Good, very good. Gong Qi's spirit body seemed solid, no different from an ordinary person. At this moment, he stretched out his hand and gently plucked at the clouds, intersecting with the vibrations deep in the air. Under the interference collision, the originally hidden and restrained structure of spacetime is revealed. It is necessary to use this to observe and explore. If we can capture traces of the spacetime Earth is in during this time, we can wait until the intensity of the interference collision reaches a certain level. The spacetime structure will change, and the shackles will loosen. That will be a great opportunity to escape. Escape, huh? Snake Tongue's thoughts were finally transmitted. They were faint and weak, but they carried an undisguised mocking tone. So what if it was really as Gong Qi said? She hadn't forgotten the silk of silence that covered the outer layer of her spirit body. In the past half a year, this strange item had taken advantage of her weakening day by day to continuously penetrate deep into her spirit body, gathering information and attempting to interfere and control her. If it wasn't for the jade-shattering secret technique that Gong Qi was worried about losing everything, perhaps she would have long since been reduced to an artifact spirit. Her life would be worse than death. Even if she truly escaped and returned to the local spacetime of Earth, she would still be Gong Qi's captive, and Gong Qi would have thousands of methods to deal with her. Her fate would only be more miserable than it was now. Gong Qi was well aware of Snake Tongue's attitude and thoughts, but he didn't care in the slightest. He was even a bit more amiable than usual. You have to use your heart. This kind of spacetime interference information is a good opportunity that you can't encounter on Earth. It will be beneficial to your future cultivation. Snake Tongue coldly retorted, Secretary General Gong is proficient in spatial teleportation and has a deep understanding of the structure of spacetime. I can't compare to such a foundation and knowledge. Not to mention, my life force is currently dissipating. I can't afford to waste this mental energy. Gong Qi laughed involuntarily, not really, not really. As the saying goes, there's light at the end of the tunnel, survival in a desperate situation. These words are designed for you and me. This is a rare opportunity. Calm down and carefully experience it. With a buzzing sound, Gong Qi's figure disappeared. No one knew where he went. Snake Tongue didn't react in the slightest. However, her spiritual body continued to fluctuate within the surging clouds. Her mind also spread out as it swayed, dispersing into the nothingness. She was used to this state. It was as if she was experiencing a long dream, So much so that she could hardly tell the difference between reality and dreams. Her soul had been cleaved into two halves. One half was above the despairing and lonely clouds. Her life force weakened with each passing day. Her mind was muddled every day, and she had to endure Gong Qi's oppression. Every day, she was like a wisp of a remnant soul without any prospects to speak of. She couldn't see any driving force of life. The other half returned to Sakura City. In the hidden environment that she was most proud of, she fused with the fake yet real Kitayama Yuki. She played the role of a retreating artist who was kept as a mistress by a powerful figure in society. This period of her life was much richer. She could walk, sit, and lie like a normal person. She could realize a complete daily routine. She could even go out for a stroll. Shopping wasn't a problem, including online shopping. She could greet and chat with the housewives of the high-class residential district. In the past, this was a boring matter that she couldn't be bothered to deal with. Now, she had a special interest in doing it. Even if those foolish housewives misunderstood her as a despicable person who had lost her financial backer, it didn't matter. In this period of her life, she understood the value of life more than any other time. However, she could only live like a normal person. As long as she had any plans or inclinations that involved the inner world or supernatural powers, she would immediately lose all control over herself. She would once again become a weak spirit, drifting in the sky above Sakura City. She could only watch helplessly as her fleshly body returned to the state of a walking corpse, unable to do anything. After a few foolish attempts, Snake Tongue understood. An invisible hand was manipulating everything she experienced. It was wantonly toying with her will. Suddenly, it was heaven, suddenly, it was earth, suddenly, it was life, and suddenly, it was death. It was impossible for her to resist. However, if Snake Tongue was given a chance to choose between the clouds and Sakura City, she would choose the latter without the slightest hesitation. She would choose the latter without the slightest hesitation. Even if the essence of it was that the invisible hand was no different from Gong Qi's plans, and it was very likely that it would turn her into a caged canary that could decide her life and death with a single thought, causing her to completely lose the freedom of her body and soul. However, at the very least, she saw a glimmer of hope for survival. In that brief state of spirit and body as one, wisps of vitality, weak but life-threatening energy, came from a channel she couldn't understand and poured into her nearly dried-up spirit body. Her spirit body was on the verge of collapse, replenishing a tiny bit of vitality and extending her life. As for Gong Qi, who was also trapped in the clouds, he only wanted to refine her into the yarn of silence. Snake Tongue already couldn't see too far ahead. She only knew that she could still live. She had to live. Just this one condition was enough. And because of this, she had to conceal the secret. I can't let Gong Qi know. This was the iron law Snake Tongue had set for herself. She was extremely weak and had long since lost the qualifications to benefit from both sides. In fact, even if she was at her peak, she still wouldn't have the qualifications to face two supernatural powers. Yes, that's right. The person who could penetrate the barrier of space and time and control her life or death was undoubtedly a super powerhouse. She could only entrust her fate to one side. This was a single-choice question, a question of life and death. This absolutely wasn't an easy matter. The yarn of silence was constantly spying on the state of her spirit body. No matter where Gong Qi was, he could use this strange item to probe Snake Tongue's specific state. Snake Tongue could only think of every method possible to conceal the traces of the changes brought about by the split soul dreamland. As for everything else, she would leave it to the heavens to decide. Time should be almost up. The pattern of these dreams was quite strong. They were more or less in accordance with a normal person's daily routine. From morning to nightfall, there would be at least one dream a day. The last time was 20 hours ago. Now that dawn was approaching, perhaps the summoning would come soon. Soon. Cold air whooshed past. The fine sound of bowstrings being drawn rose and fell. Time flowed on like this. 1 hour, 2 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours, and even another 20 hours passed. There was no sign of the expected summoning. Chapter 775. Why? Could it be that this is really a dream? As time passed, the throbbing of her mind became increasingly difficult to control. The conjurer's accurate grasp of time instead turned into the sound of blood flowing after a cut wrist. Drop by drop, it fell into the lake of her heart, allowing the ripples of death to ripple. Snake tongue floated woodenly in the clouds. The vitality and vital energy she had expected were nowhere to be found. The core of her spirit body, which had just recovered, had a clear feeling of weakness. This was like a tired long-distance runner whose physical strength was exhausted. If they kept running half-dead, they might be able to persevere by relying on the power of habit. But once they rested for a moment and let go of their energy, it would be very difficult to pull themselves together again. Snake tongue was in such a situation now. She was relying more and more on this vital energy to support her. She could no longer imagine what would happen if she lost this vital energy and this hope again. Stupid, I am too stupid. I should have expressed my attitude to that person in time. I actually wasted such a good opportunity on meaningless probing. If I miss the opportunity, perhaps I will completely miss it. Countless thoughts were born and extinguished in Snake Tongue's mind. Each one seemed to be able to transform into a viper, biting at her will and injecting venom. If there was another chance, Snake Tongue swore that she would not hesitate to beg that powerhouse for mercy, even if she had to beg like a dog. But would there really be another chance? High in the sky, the wind whistled and blew. Her spirit body flashed and extinguished. It could scatter into the clouds at any time, almost out of shape. Snake Tongue's mind gradually fell into a trance. The thread of clarity and decisiveness that she had always maintained for half a year seemed to be melting away. As a result, the veil of silence that had always covered her spirit body immediately reacted. This seemingly formless strange object suddenly tightened and seeped down layer by layer. Snake Tongue awoke in horror. She wanted to summon her remaining strength to struggle, but she had already missed the best opportunity. The defensive dam silently collapsed. The veil of silence's pressure penetrated and scattered her vital energy. It intertwined and fused with her spirit body, becoming one. In an instant, everything had reached a point of no return. Snake Tongue was still desperately trying to reorganize her defensive line to protect the core structure of her spirit body. But this was only a desperate struggle. With her reorganizing speed, she could not keep up with the powerful erosion of the veil of silence. Even the preset jade-shattering secret technique was delayed and wavering. Then, time seemed to have paused for a moment. At the very least, the process of the veil of silence's infiltration had paused for a moment. It was this slight difference that made Snake Tongue's desperate efforts truly worth it. She promptly reorganized her defensive line. Even though she was still in a precarious situation, she was still able to block the seeping pressure of the silent yarn outside the core structure of her spirit body. A faint sizzling sound rang out. Because of the loss of control from before, at least a tenth of the Snake Tongue spirit's body had been vaporized and shattered. It shrunk in size and became even more hazy. However, compared to the fate of becoming an artifact spirit puppet, it was still much better. That was close. The heavens didn't give up on me. No, if I really had the protection of the gods, how could I have fallen to such a state? There's a problem, a big problem. After walking the line between life and death and returning, Snake Tongue's rational core gradually appeared amidst her frightened and despairing emotions. She saw through the details that shouldn't have appeared in the situation where she had almost fallen into the abyss. The veil of silence should have been able to completely refine her, so how could something have gone wrong at the last moment? That was because he still couldn't hide it. With a single thought, she connected all the previous links one after another, forming a logical chain that was gradually becoming complete. At first, Snake Tongue pondered, but then she suddenly began to chuckle. The sound of her laughter became louder and louder, shaking the sky and striking the clouds. It spread far and wide. At this point, the fluke heart hidden in despair and hope vanished into thin air. However, a new thought sprouted, and a large number of roots and branches sprouted, supporting the frail spirit body and channeling new power. What's wrong? My mind is in turmoil. In the midst of Snake Tongue's unbridled laughter, a thought suddenly cut in. The clouds in front of her rolled and soared, and the structure of the void hummed and shook. A second later, Gong Chi's face appeared in the collapsing clouds. His ice-cold willpower pulled out a little more, and the power of an extraordinary would be able to sweep Snake Tongue's frail spirit body into ashes. However, Snake Tongue didn't pay him any attention. Her laughter didn't stop, and she was very happy. Gong Chi's face was calm, as if he had just moved back from afar and didn't know what had just happened. He didn't seem to mind that he had just missed a good opportunity to collect Snake Tongue, nor did he care about her current extremely rude attitude. He only spoke neither quickly nor slowly. When encountering a major event, one must remain calm. Especially when hope is in front. In this way, there was almost no difference from 20 hours ago. But now, Snake Tongue heard more meaning. Snake Tongue floated up and laughed in response. I've been trapped here for half a year, but this is the first time I feel that Secretary General Gong truly cares about me and doesn't want me to vanish into thin air. Oh, now you don't even want to be restrained by the veil of silence. About this, when did Secretary General Gong discover this? Which? Gong Chi still wanted to feign ignorance, or perhaps he didn't want to make things clear and cause more trouble, but how could Snake Tongue do as he wished? The outline of Snake Tongue's nearly shapeless spirit body pressed back against her chest. Of course it's the one Secretary General Gong cares about the most. The matter is clearly laid out there. You're a senior with a high position. What's the point of going back and forth like this and that? Their gazes and wills crisscrossed and collided. Although there was a difference in strength, in terms of willpower, Snake Tongue didn't fall into a disadvantageous position for a short time. This was a situation that had never occurred since the two of them had come into contact, but it still happened. One wrong step, and every step was wrong, but he had no choice but to make a mistake. Gong Chi muttered to himself for a moment and finally nodded. That's right, there's nothing to hide. Snake Tongue, I'm very interested in the life force accumulated at the core of your spirit body, the channel through which it came. As expected. Snake Tongue laughed silently. Because of the life force transmitted through the unity of spirit and body, it would inevitably change the spirit body's natural weakening trend. Sooner or later, it would accumulate to the point that Gong Chi couldn't ignore it. This day would come sooner or later. Snake Tongue had tried to conceal it, but she only hoped to escape this cloud prison before Gong Chi sensed it. Unfortunately, in the end, she hadn't made it in time. Gong Chi, this old bastard, naturally didn't slow down because he cherished Snake Tongue's life. Instead, he had misgivings. He had misgivings about the fleeting channel that was connected to her spirit body. Clearly, the words he had said before about the collision of space-time and the loosening of the structure were too much of an exaggeration. Gong Chi didn't have the confidence. At the very least, this old bastard didn't have the confidence to return to Earth after escaping this world. So Gong Chi specifically mentioned the traces of the space-time Earth was in. In this old bastard's calculations, she was a kite. A kite with a string on the other side of Earth. No matter what, the string couldn't be broken. But was the string really still there? What was the plan of the powerful being who was far away on Earth, the one who dominated her life and hope? Enla quietly walked into the living area on the lower deck of the yacht. Right now, the lighting in the small living room had already been dimmed. Only the radiance of the projection diffused. Luo Nan sat on the sofa in the small living room. He was like a sculpture. Occasionally, he would move his fingers, change angles, and switch images. He quietly examined the complex structure that could dazzle people. Enla didn't dare to disturb him. She just waited at the entrance. Ever since Luo Nan returned to Xia City, Enli's sharp senses told her that Luo Nan was a bit different from before when they met again. On the surface, this man seemed to have obtained a complex design from who knows where. It was similar to the double helix structure of DNA. And every node on it was a complex design diagram. After Luo Nan returned, he stared at it in a daze. Sometimes his brows furrowed. Sometimes he would suddenly laugh. His moods were unpredictable. But Enlo clearly felt that there was a wonderful core within this chaotic state of mind. Especially when he was contemplating. He was truly contemplating. He wasn't thinking like he was facing a big exam. He was racking his brains in a competition. He was more like a philosopher. His thoughts were condensed but not rigid. His thoughts were scattered but not chaotic. His rhythm was much more relaxed. This kind of Luo Nan's behavior pattern was increasingly hard to predict. What happened in the few hours he spent returning to Xia City yesterday? Looking at the current situation, it didn't seem to be too bad. Enlo really wanted to get to the bottom of this, but as Luo Nan's personal secretary, she needed to keep her duties. She could only restrain her curiosity and wait in silence until Luo Nan's observation came to an end. What happened? Luo Nan didn't turn off the light in the work area. He just tilted his head to ask. Enlo walked to the side of the sofa. She bowed and answered, Miss Moya took a cruise ship. It arrived at the port at 4 in the afternoon. The person in charge of receiving her was a member of the Banshing Music Festival's organizing committee. Luo Nan should be able to obtain more detailed information about this from Xia City. Enlo just skimmed over it. She just said the information she obtained through the Blood Flame Orders channels. Miss Moya's fan club is being held at a cultural center near the hotel she's staying at. The scale isn't large. There are about 150 people present. But at the same time the fan club is being held, Yukawa Isuk, the sponsor you reminded us to pay attention to, will be going to inspect the cultural center. The cultural center is the property of Yukawa's family. Luo Nan's lips twitched. What a coincidence. He took the flexible screen Enlo handed over as he spoke and looked at the relevant information. According to what was shown, Yukawa Isuk wasn't an ability user. But his family had an illustrious reputation in Bansheng. They had strong influence in both the military and the political world. They were also very active project investors. They had invested funds in many frontier projects. They could be considered a very standard investor. And then there was Appraiser Jade Association. Luo Nan caught this word he had heard before from Yukawa Isuk's long list of titles. En Li's intelligence work could be considered solid. She even added a link to this specific organization. Luo Nan opened it and sized it up a few times. He paid particular attention to the numerous names and their corresponding backgrounds. He suddenly laughed when he was done. Chapter 776. Sister Cat, Mother Cat. Ah no, Granny Cat. For the sake of our friendship, please help me. Zhong Yu's pleading voice was transmitted through electromagnetic waves, passing through thousands of miles of ocean waves to reach Cat Eye's ears. This guy, who had always been thick-skinned, had completely thrown his face into the mud just to beg for an opportunity. I know this is a disgrace. I know this isn't right. I know I'm not qualified, but I'm the only member in Xia City. What can I do when this disgrace falls on my head? Zhong Yu repeated these words over and over again. My request isn't high. I just hope that Mr. Luo can give me a clear answer regarding the invitation. Of course, if I am fortunate enough to travel together with him, then it would be the fortune of 8 generations of my ancestors. How will your father react when he hears this? Even if he lashes me 100 times, he can't take the life of his own son. The Jade Review Conference can take your life? Aren't you a big shot who can talk to Wang Yu? Sister Cat. Sister Cat. Just treat my words as farts. Others may not know what kind of moral character I am, but I can't hide it from you. Yes, they can't take my life, but they can hold down my loans. I'll jump into the sea if the funds for my investments run out. Hee hee, that's a pretty good way to die. Cat Eyes had just walked into the lobby of the hotel. She saw Tang Yi already sitting in the corner of the sofa and greeted her. Tang Yi responded with a smile and immediately got up to greet her. Sister Cat. Zhong Yu's mournful wails became even more miserable. Cat Eyes was disinclined to speak with him any further. Where are you? Acumen College. It's right here at Gear on the north coast. Sister Cat, I knew you would help me. Thank you. Thank you. As long as Mr. Luo is willing. You see that little forest behind Gear? Half a year ago, a fellow named Tank died there. His internal organs ruptured and his flesh turned to mush. Huh. If this isn't enough, there's another fellow named Jin Tong. He's in the sea outside Xia City. Not even his bones remain. If you jump down there, you might be able to find him as a companion. Sister Mao, don't scare me. Hee, I'm just reminding you that your father can whip you, the Jade Inspection Association can take your loan, and that person can take your life if he's in a bad mood. For the sake of our friendship, I'll give these words to you for free. You're welcome. Cat Eyes hung up the phone. She frowned slightly. Actually, she was a bit baffled. That shameless bastard Zhong Gong was nowhere to be found. This proved that Luo Nan really wasn't at Gear on the North Bank. That guy had been hiding for almost a week. Where did he go? It wasn't to the extent of completely cutting off contact with the outside world. Could it be that he ran to another city like a few days ago? Then the most likely place for him to go now should be, at this moment, Tang Yi walked to her side and laughed in spite of herself. Overbearing. Yes. Cat Eyes understood that Tang Yi wasn't referring to her attitude. Instead, she was referring to the powerful power that the Jade Review Association represented. That group of people had always been arrogant and proficient in trickery. They loved to scheme against people's hearts. Right now, Zhong Gong, a minor character with a complicated and subtle relationship, was thrown out in order to provoke Luo Nan. It would be best to provoke Luo Nan into doing something. Then, they would suppress Luo Nan and grind down his spirit. This was an overt plot that was thrown right in Luo Nan's face. Clearly, this group of people were confident that they had Luo Nan's life in their grasp. They were too lazy to conceal anything. Of course, this was also part of the effect of the plot. Luo Nan pretended not to see. Temporarily avoiding them was the right thing to do. He avoided them. Oh, that's right. You can't hold too much hope. Tang Yi laughed involuntarily. She reached out to grab Cat Eyes by the shoulder and walked out of the hotel. Let's go. I'll pay for all of today's expenses. Treat it as thanks in place of Emoya. Today was the third day after arriving in Ban City. Early in the morning, Emoya, Wild Jujube, and Gauda went to the cultural center across the street to rehearse. She was an intelligent woman. She had interacted with Cat Eyes and the others many times during her 5 days on the cruise. She had already understood her own circumstances. She had just properly relaxed on the cruise. After arriving in Ban City, she had lived in seclusion. Every day, she would only travel between the hotel and the cultural center. This gave the security personnel quite a bit of convenience. As for Cat Eyes and Tang Yi, their mission today was to patrol the surrounding environment, formulate a revised route of retreat, and so on. The two were like best friends going shopping side by side. Tang Yi was taller than Cat Eyes by an entire head. She was used to wearing short hunting clothes, long pants, and brown boots. Her long legs were a complete mess of handsomeness. Even though she was younger than Cat Eyes by 6 or 7 years, her words and actions were calm and unruffled. It was hard to tell her exact age. Cat Eyes was out in the field. Her refreshing attire had the effect of reducing her age. The two walked side by side on the street. It was hard to tell who was the older sister and who was the younger sister. In any case, they were both pleasing to the eye. Cat Eyes really wasn't used to having her shoulders held by others, but Tang Yi was quite familiar with it. She chuckled and said, if it weren't for that group of people, Emoya would be by my side in an ideal situation. You put your arms around Emoya's shoulders too. It's fine if we just hold hands. Chapter 777. Cat eyes, long time no see. Her red lips curled up beneath her sunglasses. Sinyan calmly replied to Cat eyes. They were both ability users of the world's circle of Xia City. Of course, the two of them knew each other, but their friendship was superficial. However, the way Sinyan treated the other person was completely different. She even put down her cup, smiled, stood up, and opened her arms. Don't you want a hug, peony? The corners of Tang Yi's lips curled up, and she stepped forward to give Sinyan a hug. In the East Asian cultural circle, this was already a relatively intimate action. Cat eyes was quite surprised. You two know each other? More than half a year ago, Tang Yi had not officially entered the entertainment circle. Was it because of Her Majesty Empress Wu? Sure enough, this was Sinyan's explanation. In the past, we were all with Her Majesty Empress Wu, and we all have a standard attractiveness. It's very normal for us to admire each other. Comparing mirrors is much more interesting. Unfortunately, Ying is not here. She's probably here to stab you. Compared to Sinyan, Tang Yi's attitude was a bit calmer. She didn't have any intention of sitting down and having a long conversation. She spoke very straightforwardly. Last time, you caused trouble and forced that person to explode. You actually dare to come and join in the fun? Cat eyes knew that Tang Yi was referring to the 2000th Miss incident. Sinyan was the one who let out the news, arousing the greed of countless people. Luo Nan, Roy Wen, and even their entire family were pushed into the teeth of the storm. Were it not for the fact that Xia City had two extraordinaries overseeing it, and that they had promptly sent Jin Tong as a sacrifice to the heavens, as well as Luo Nan's world-shaking speech, it was unknown to what degree the situation would have deteriorated to. Sinyan pretended not to know. I have no choice. I found a new boyfriend, but he's a black-hearted bastard. I can't cure him at all. If I don't destroy a few of his cards, I'll feel like I'm losing out. Tang Yi glanced at her. What about your boyfriend? Sinyan laughed as she waved her hand. Her chestnut-colored hair swayed gently. Under her black hair, her red lips and white teeth were revealed. She had the standard posture of a flirtatious B*TCH. You want that kind of trash to go shopping with a woman? I'll just bring his card. To the side, Cat Eyes thought back to the information she had gathered at the Wild Inn last time. She coldly said, Isn't it going to be quite difficult to kill them all? Of course not. Don't underestimate a woman's evil thoughts. Sinyan was clearly hinting at something, causing Cat Eye's head to ache. This woman was just like that. Her erratic stance, ruthless methods, and the results of harming others and herself. It was obvious that she could not gain anything from it, but she was never tired of it. Unfortunately, she had an ever-changing temperament. She was able to hold on and let go of things. At this time, she giggled and stuck close to Tang Yi. She directly held on to the crook of Tang Yi's arm. Since we've met, you guys can help me bring disaster to them. Cat Eyes chuckled twice in her heart. She was just about to refuse when she suddenly heard the humming of an engine approaching from above. A rather large motorcade landed on the platform of the high-rise building that belonged to the cultural center. Judging from the banging of the car doors, there were quite a lot of people getting off. Cat Eye's mental senses naturally swept over, and the scene dozens of meters away was taken into her heart. Cat Eyes frowned. It was also at this time that God, who was within the cultural center, contacted her and reported, the upper echelons of the Lean Century have come over for a temporary inspection. I see it. There seems to be another eye-catching guy. This was an unplanned situation, and Cat Eyes was in no mood to mess around with Sinyan. She gave Tang Yi a meaningful glance and coldly said, Thanks to some people, I'm currently out in the field. I'm afraid I don't have the time. It's fine as long as I do. Bai Xinyan held on to Tang Yi's arm and did not let go. Sooner or later, a disaster will always be a disaster. I have nothing to do anyway, so I'll just follow your rhythm. Fine. This person was sticking close. According to Cat Eye's temperament, she simply could not be bothered to give Bai Xinyan any face. She would just wash her hands and leave. However, there was still Tang Yi in the middle. Tang Yi's expression was calm and tranquil. Her attitude towards Bai Xinyan was completely different, but she never had any intention of pushing Bai Xinyan away. It was clear that there were some tricks that outsiders did not know about. Cat Eyes exchanged glances with Tang Yi once more. They briefly weighed the pros and cons, but in the end, she still curled her lips and walked in front without saying a word. They directly entered the cultural center. From the outside, the cultural center was rather unremarkable. There were not many people inside, but the decorations were exquisite. After entering, a large portion of the clamor of the streets outside was cut off. It was truly the essence of quiet amidst the noise. However, in reality, the atmosphere of this place did not quite match with the rock and roll style of the Mountain Creek Band. The corresponding influence had appeared during the past 2 days of rehearsals. It even directly interfered with the band's song selection. Whether or not the performance was successful was not within the scope of Cat Eye's concern. Instead, she was deeply curious about the relationship between the two people behind her. Tang Yi and Bai Xinyan walked at the back. At first, Bai Xinyan spoke a few words, but later on, she no longer said anything. The atmosphere was subtle and gradually became oppressive. It was clear that the relationship between them was not as good as Bai Xinyan had described. It would only be more complicated. After the three entered the cultural center, they naturally went in the direction of the concert hall. However, they did not walk far before someone raised their voice and called out to them from the second-floor corridor. Miss Xinyan. The three raised their heads and saw a group of people stopped there. Each of them wore suits and leather shoes, and they looked like business elites. At the head of the group was a middle-sized young man with a dignified appearance. He was currently bowing in greeting from afar. Bai Xinyan smiled and waved her hand. Before she could respond, the young man said a few words to the people beside him. He left the group behind and walked straight down the stairs. It must be said that this was Cat Eye's first time seeing this person. However, she had long since read his information. Even before entering the cultural center, she had used her mental senses to capture and recognize him. Yukawa Aishuk. The main culprit who had invited Moya to Ban City. Tang Yi's arm was still held by Bai Xinyan. She casually asked, "This can't be your boyfriend, right? He can be a spare tire." Bai Xinyan smiled at the rapidly approaching Yukawa Aishuk in a reserved manner. Her mouth, however, was a different matter. She only suppressed her voice. Yukawa Aishuk was completely unaware of this. He walked closer and bowed once more in greeting. "Miss Xinyan, we meet again. Welcome to Ban City. Please allow me to show you my hospitality as a host." Oh, these two are. Following Yukawa Aishuk's gaze, they entered an especially hypocritical mutual introduction period. Looking at this person's eyes, he clearly knew the identity and background of Cat Eyes and Tang Yi. They were the same. Bai Xinyan asked in a casual manner, "Is there an event here today?" "The music festival is about to begin. The Ikeda Cultural Center is an important branch venue and needs to be inspected. In the next few days, there will be a series of warm-up performances here. Lean also needs to find moldable talents and unearth new potential." Lies. Bai Xinyan immediately concluded. Yukawa Aishuk did not feel awkward. He maintained a polite smile. "I'm sorry, I didn't manage to hide it from Miss Xinyan. Truth is often impolite. In fact, I think this is a good place to hunt women. I like a free and uninhibited soul with a rhythm." At this moment, the gazes of the three women focused on Yukawa Aishuk's face. Soon after, their gazes converged in the air, transmitting subtle information to each other. Of course, Bai Xinyan's eyes were hidden behind her sunglasses. No one could see through her. Yukawa Aishuk very well blended offense and politeness together. The 6th is the day the Jade Light sets sail. It is also the holiday I set for myself. I hope to bring such a beautiful lady on board and relax for a while. Bai Xinyan asked him again, has someone already chosen? Yukawa Aishuk was about to respond when Cat Eye's wristband vibrated. Cat Eyes swept a glance. The caller was Zhong Yun again. She was too lazy to pick up and directly cut the call. But not even half a second later, her wristband vibrated again. I should add that kid to my blacklist. But when she looked at the caller ID, it was a different person this time. Cat Eyes was slightly startled. She nodded to the others in apology, walked to the side, and answered the call. Hello, Secretary He? Yuan on the other side did not say any pleasantries and directly said, Mr. Luo left Xia City. Where did he go? Did you make any arrangements beforehand? God knows how many times he had left. Now that he was finally out in the open for once, it really wasn't easy. Cat Eyes cursed in her heart, but of course she could not say these words out loud. She could only continue to play dumb. Even you as a secretary don't know. How would I know? As she spoke, Yukawa Aishuk also received a call a few steps away. That person bowed to Bai Xinyan and Tang Yi. There are matters that require my attention. I cannot accompany you for a long chat. I am truly sorry. I hope you will give me a chance to remedy this in the future. Excuse me. Yukawa Aishuk turned around and left after he finished speaking. Even though he did not lack etiquette, it still gave people the feeling that his pace was much more hurried than when he came. Cat Eyes watched his receding figure. Her thoughts were slightly distracted, so much so that Yuan's crucial words were blurred. She only heard the tail end. What did you say was in the open sea? 2 minutes ago, Mr. Luo rode the Flying Devil Ray and moved east into the open sea. His whereabouts are unknown. Huh? Cat Eyes' first thought was nonsense. Don't tell me it's the one raised in the lake in front of Gear on the north bank. That's it. Impossible. That Luo fellow wanted to leave Xia City. He didn't need too many methods. Why did he use this method? Just imagining such a scene made Cat Eyes feel that it was extremely absurd. That Devil Ray looks intimidating, it looks cool, and its destructive power is quite strong, but in the end, it's still a sea creature. Even if it's a mutant and has the ability to fly, the branch has measured its flying speed. It can fly at most 70 to 80 kilometers per hour. It's not even as fast as a flying car. 2 minutes. 2 minutes might not even be enough to get out of Acumen College. The Pingjiang district is over 100 kilometers away from the sea. You really don't know? How would I know? Yuan did not say anything else. She just sent over a video file. Cat Eyes immediately opened it. At this time, Tang Yi and Bai Xinyan walked over, one on the left and one on the right. The 3 women gathered together and were extremely close. They did not care about anything else. They only looked at the small projection area. The original image was probably a random shot by a passerby. The ambient noise was very noisy, but the anti-shake lens was very powerful. It clearly projected a white scar that continuously advanced forward, cutting through the horizon. Judging from its height, it was at least 1,000 meters. When the camera zoomed in, the person who recorded it immediately burst out with profanity. Fuck me. Chapter 778. After saying goodbye to Bai Xinyan and the others, Yukawa Aishuk did not join up with the mighty patrol team. Instead, he went directly to the upper level of the cultural center, to a temporary private room. In here, he turned on the projection system and silently looked at the video data from various channels. The angles, sharpness, and duration of these videos were all different. But the core content of the video was, without exception, the sky above Xia City, the dazzling flight trail. The advantage of piling up data was that there was more information than appearing through a single channel. This set of video data started from when Luo Nan stepped out of gear on the north bank, shook off Zone Lang, and boarded the Flying Devil Ray all the way until he entered the sea outside Xia City. The entire process was recorded. The internal intelligence analyst of the corporation listed out the information revealed in the series of videos one by one. Target flight distance 134 kilometers. Target flight speed, Mach 2. 5 average speed. Maximum speed, Mach 4. The Devil Ray's limbs are in an unnatural state. High probability is that it is only a carrier of energy operation. Flight altitude, temperature, and surrounding atmospheric environment do not meet the conditions for a flight trail. It is suspected that there is a large amount of water vapor gathering beforehand. The analyzed data elements were extremely detailed. It looked like Luo Nan had been thoroughly dissected inside and out. A countermeasure could be formulated at any time. But reality was far from this. Yukawa Aishuk only skimmed through the video analysis data once. His mind was elsewhere. But after these videos, after flying out of Xia City, it went straight to the bottom of the sea. Its whereabouts are unknown. This was the result of integrating a large amount of intelligence data. Yukawa Aishuk furrowed his brows. His expression was as heavy as water. Ban City and Xia City were only 1,500 kilometers apart. With the speed of the Flying Devil Ray, it would take half an hour to reach Xia City. If this was the case, then it would save him a lot of trouble. Even if it was a nuclear bomb, it would be exposed to the satellite, radar, and other monitoring systems. There would be people to deal with it. But after Luo Nan flew out of Xia City, he went straight to the bottom of the sea. This move alone turned 70 to 80% of the satellite and radar equipment into scrap. After entering the sea, it was unknown what method he had used, but a living person and a mutant with vigorous vitality had disappeared without alerting the sonar array and various monitoring systems at the bottom of the sea. They had disappeared without a trace just like that. If this was the case, then things were really troublesome. While Yukawa Aishuk was deep in thought, there was a knock on the door. After receiving permission, the group's intelligence analysis section chief, Takamoto Shigeru, quietly entered. This lean middle-aged man was Yukawa Aishuk's confidant, and was also in charge of handling the most sensitive issues. After entering, Takamoto Shigeru immediately expressed his concern. "President, there's a lot of bad news going around about you." Yukawa Hidesuk slightly waved his hand, interrupting Luo Nan's words. He just asked, where in the world did Luo Nan go? Takamoto Shigeru stood upright. "I'm sorry, but we haven't been able to find any traces of him." "Why?" Yukawa Aishuk stared at his confidant. Luo Nan can conceal his aura, but the Devil Ray is a huge target. In terms of the strength of his blood energy, it's almost at the B rank standard. The outer seas are the domain of the marine aberrations, and they are very densely distributed. As long as it enters the domain of other aberrations, it will definitely cause conflict. There is no way it can hide. Before Yukawa Aishuk could finish his sentence, a call came in on the secret line. It must be said that he possessed an astonishing amount of influence in Ban City, but the people who were able to fight their way into this line were not easy to deal with. He could only split his attention to deal with it. The moment the call connected, the person on the other side asked, "Tomokua-kun, have you heard the news that the Cage Master is coming to Ban City? A powerful A-rank threat could enter the country illegally at any time. Governor Do is very worried about this." Yukawa Aishuk furrowed his brows, but his tone was very calm. "Kondo-kun, I am also paying close attention to this news. However, in a similar situation, we can only obtain more detailed information by consulting the military. On my side. Isn't it Tomokua-kun who invited that person's relative to perform in Ban City? Governor Do believes that you have a good relationship with that person, so he hopes to express his concern through Tomokua-kun." Yukawa Aishuk's gaze was ice-cold when he heard this. He swept his gaze across Takamoto Shigeru's face, and Takamoto nodded slightly, indicating that this was what he wanted to say earlier. Great waves of emotions churned in Yukawa Aishuk's heart. He managed to deal with Governor Do's loyal dog with great difficulty. He hung up the phone and stared at Takamoto Shigeru. Someone is deliberately spreading the news that I invited Imoya to participate in the music festival? Having a smart boss would save a lot of time and effort. Of course, Takamoto Shigeru couldn't simply go along with this. He spoke of the details. Apologies, President. The news spreads very quickly. It happened before this incident. Therefore, the intelligence department believed that the Jade Society was deliberately spreading the news. They were still coordinating and communicating with each other, but things got out of hand because of Luo Nan's flight. Before this, Yukawa Aishuk rewound the video and rewatched the first half of the video, especially the entire process of Luo Nan coming out of gear on the north bank, forcefully shaking off Zhong Gong's entanglement, and summoning the Flying Devil Ray. Luo Nan's face was cold the entire time. It could even be said that he was expressionless. It was in line with his usual reserved persona, but according to Takamoto Shigeru, there was clearly a deeper meaning behind this. He's putting on an act? Did he plan all of this? There's no problem logically. Takamoto Shigeru spoke in a low voice. There's a lot of news right now that Imoya's personal freedom has been restricted. Add the stimulation from the Wilderness Laboratory, and Luo Nan will react intensely to this. This includes, but is not limited to, carrying out an unrestrained large-scale conflict in Band City, attacking the Jade Light crews, assassinating related personnel, and so on. Since his whereabouts are unknown right now, he's given too much room for imagination. Plus, the infrasonic wave ability that Luo Nan developed for the Flying Devil Ray is a serious threat to ability users under B rank. This is especially true for the majority of people in the secular world. If he uses this weapon, if he dares to use this weapon, he's dead for sure. Yukawa Aishuk slammed the table heavily. The Band City Ability User Branch, the Band City branch of every order, and the headquarters of the Amaterasu Order. There are plenty of powerful people who can kill him. Takamoto Shigeru really wanted to remind his president that the only people in Band City who could truly kill Luo Nan were the two extraordinaries of the Amaterasu Order. But the words came to his mouth. But he hasn't displayed any clear inclination up until now. This was where Luo Nan was the smartest. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.